Live.
Terrific. At 1:03, I am calling to get to order the Finance Committee for the first day of 2 weeks of budget hearings on the budget that's being proposed for fiscal year 2023. And if we could get a roll call, please.
Councillor Villarreal. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Villarreal.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Rivera.
Here.
Councillor Cassett.
Here.
Councillor Lindell.
Here.
And Councillor Romero Worth.
I am here.
Quorum.
Thank you so much. All right, we're on to approval of the agenda. Are there changes to the agenda as it's been presented?
No changes, Madam Chair.
All right, if there are no changes from the committee, can we have a motion, please?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for approval of the agenda. If we could get a roll call, please.
Councillor Villarreal.
I'm not used to being calling first. I'm always last. Yes.
Your lucky day. Councillor Rivera.
Yes.
Councillor Cassett.
Yes.
Councillor Lindell.
Yes.
And Councillor Romero Worth.
Yes,
Thank you.
terrific. We have a quorum and an agenda, and we'll move on to Chair's opening remarks. And I just want to welcome everybody here today. We have a big job ahead of us. We will be meeting for the next today and 2 more days. And then the following week, we have 3 more days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, to work through the budget for FY23, which has been presented to us by the executive as is required by the city charter. And I very much look forward to diving in and getting a better understanding of the investments that are being proposed, and just getting a good understanding of kind of the year ahead and where we'll be putting our priorities and our resources. I want to talk a little bit about the committee. We have a lot of time in some ways, and we probably have not enough time in other ways. And so my job will be to try to keep us on track. I want to make sure that we, finish our agendas on a daily basis so that we can get to the end of this 2-week period, having had everybody, have the time they need to ask the questions they have, to understand what's being proposed and be in a position to vote on it at governing body. I do see we have at least one member who is not part of the Finance Committee, but part of the governing body. I just want to say welcome. There will be time for other members of the governing body who don't sit on finance to ask questions. I would only ask the Finance Committee that as we move forward, we be respectful of the time we're spending. There are some conversations which we may need to put in what I'm going to call a parking lot, where we can have deeper conversations, maybe through our committees. And we have all 3 chairs of the standing committees of the council represented on the Finance Committee. So I think this will be good for everybody to understand kind of what deeper conversations we may want to have in particular areas at other committee meetings going forward. So I just ask that everybody be respectful of the time. I will try to keep us on track. I think we will work as a group. So please don't feel like you're individually responsible to ask every single question that might be asked to develop the understanding we need. I think, we can work as a team and together ask the questions and get the information needed to build the understanding that we'll need to act on this budget. So really appreciate your time in this. Thank you in advance. And with that, I think I will turn it over to Director And I would just say congratulations, Director, on the work that's gone into this. I know you've spent many late nights and weekends with your team, and this represents a substantial amount of work. And I'm sorry, I got to put you on hold for a minute while I go to Councilwoman Villarreal. Councilwoman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to make sure the link works for this meeting. I got a couple of emails from constituents saying that the link is not working. So if staff can look into that for us, please. Thank you.
So to the Zoom link? Okay.
Yes.
Who would do that?
Counselor, I could take a look at it. We did do a few tests and everything is functioning fine. They can also try to access the link from the City of Santa Fe website under Hot Topics, and it's under Web Meeting Links 2022. That doesn't work, just let us know.
Okay, if you wouldn't mind just checking it out, and then Councilwoman, if people are still having trouble and you hear about it, if just flag us and we'll stop so that everybody who wants to be part of this meeting today has that opportunity. All right, back to you, Director McCoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the mayor and the councilors that are joining us today and for the next 2 weeks as we dive into first today, the overview of the FY23 recommended budget, and then into each of the different departments in the weeks ahead. I would like to acknowledge, to thank Chair Romero Worth, as well as many of the other councilors that have expressed to our team thanks and appreciation for everything that we have done over the last few weeks. It really is, the budget is such a team effort across all different departments, and it really does take quite a few months to be able to get to this point that we're at now. I did want to give an extra special recognition to the budget team that you have joining you today for the presentation. We'll start off with Andy Hopkins, the budget officer. He has led us through, been our fearless leader through this process. We also have joining us today his senior staff, Lawrence Lovato, who has also put in long nights and hours with us, as well as Maria Grego, who is the newest member of our team. We also have joining us today, Alexis Ludero, our assistant finance director, and Bradley Flitch, our investment and planning officer, as well as Dr. White, the economist that has been assisting us with our economic projections and our revenue forecasting. So big appreciation. Again, this team was working long hours, lots of nights and weekends through the past few months to bring you the package in front of you over the next few days. So with that, I will ask our team to present the PowerPoint. Thank you, Lawrence. If we can go to the first slide. We are going today to have an overview of the entire budget, and then Dr. White will review with us the economic outlook and some risk factors. We will then go over more detail on the revenue picture, as well as some highlights of the expenditures. So next slide, please. First, to start off with the budget overview, I just wanted to say a few words about the context that we find ourselves in. Very different from the last 2 years, and after persevering through the last 2 years of the pandemic, we find ourselves in a very different position heading into fiscal year 23. We are in the middle of a recovery that has offered us a once-in-a-generation opportunity to transform the city that we live in. We are very proud of the FY23 recommended budget that we have put together, totaling $382 million, primarily because it does build on the priorities and the collaboration that the mayor and the council has done to set a fiscally sustainable course for the city of Santa Fe. At the same time, we are proud of the investments in these shared priorities, which will result in delivering exceptional services to build a better, more just and prosperous city for us Santa Feans. The FY23 budget does meet the city's financial obligations, including our debt service including increases to our health insurance costs, and also leverages the city's resources, including state resources, federal resources, and our local revenue share into our shared goals. Santa Fe does remain in a very strong fiscal position through the end of FY22 and leading into FY23. Today, you'll hear from Dr. White as he gives you an overview of the economic outlook. We will hear about high levels of consumer spending and our strong employment market that will compete against a number of headwinds in the economy, including inflation, higher interest rates, and our current geopolitical risks. However, the most likely revenue scenario for Santa Fe in FY23 is positive, albeit slowing economic growth. Our recurring city revenues are forecasted to exceed our pre-pandemic levels due to stronger revenue from lodgers tax, from gross receipts tax. We are very, very proud of this, that we are now back to not just pre-pandemic levels, but actually exceeding pre-pandemic levels. This is as I mentioned before, a very transformational year for Santa Fe. Monetary policy, however, and rising rates will likely reduce inflation and curb consumption into next year. So these are some of the headwinds that Dr. White is going to be talking to us about. And the bottom line is that we will continue to exercise caution in response to these mixed economic signals as we move forward into the next budget year. Next slide, please. Today, we will also be reviewing with you some priorities reflected in our FY23 budget that you will hear in much more detail throughout the coming 2 weeks. These priorities do span social and economic policy initiatives, as well as investing in the city's infrastructure and our basic services. Next slide, please. What do we see in the year ahead? We today and over the next few weeks have in front of you the FY23 operating budget. Next Tuesday, we will also be reviewing the $15 million ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act funding, and the priorities that the city of Santa Fe is putting forward for your consideration. We do have multiple streams of revenue that we always plan for, including our federal revenue, like the ARPA funding, as well as state capital outlay dollars. And this year, we are also looking to deploy another gross receipts tax backed bond in the fall. Next slide, please. Just walk down memory lane for a minute. Last year at this time, we did have several priorities for our FY22 budget, which included raises for our employees and funding the employee and employer share of the health insurance increases from our reserves. At this time last year, we had a series of other priorities. We submitted a balanced budget. We did commit to coming back with last year at this time with multiple rounds of budget adjustments if the economy and the revenue outpaced the revenue that we presented last year at this time. So just a reminder that in the fall, we invested with our additional revenue and priorities like close to $1 million for body camera initiative, $22 million for the airport terminal parking and circulation project, and about $10 million for the teen center, among others. The second round of budget adjustments that we did was in the fall, where we committed one-time resources to retention and recruitment incentives, in addition to adding capacity by creating new positions or unfreezing positions that had been frozen. Next slide, please. The most recent round of budget adjustments added approximately $11 million into the city's critical operational needs, everything from funding new police vehicles to funding some key additional capital expenses that we needed to get moving on now in the spring to take advantage of the construction season. So just as we did last year at this time, we are committing again next year to continue adjusting the budget as necessary as revenue comes, as we see the revenue patterns hold. Next slide, please. As we always talk about, the budget at this time is a plan. What you have before you today is a roadmap that includes several different priorities, including across the board funding for salary increases. We'll review the details of that with you in a few minutes, continuing our commitment to our employees when it comes to retention and hiring, funding frozen positions that were frozen in the current fiscal year, reverting back to the pre-pandemic methodology of applying vacancy credits to be able to capture for the natural attrition and the natural vacancy rates that we see in each department, and being able to fund the employer share of our health insurance increases as a portion of our fixed costs. We will also be presenting a reshaping of our city government by using vacant positions to ensure our staffing meets our modern government needs, as well as adding about 20 positions throughout all different departments in the current year. We're also putting like with like. This comes, a great example of this is being able to centralize the graffiti functions and add capacity to our graffiti team in the Parks and Open Spaces division of the Public Works Department. We also are taking the approach of understanding that there is going to be a few pilots this year that we're going to use one-time dollars to fund, and to be able to see if these pilot projects are worth investing in on a recurring basis. And finally, we look forward to presenting the ARPA funding with you next Tuesday. Next slide, please. So I'd like to introduce Dr. White to the group. He has been with us for over a year now, assisting us with the economic outlook and the revenue forecasting for the city of for the entire city. We really look forward to his presentation today. Dr. White, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Director McCoy, and thank you so much for the council and other governing members of Santa Fe. It's a pleasure, of course, to meet with you and have the opportunity to look over some of this incredibly interesting economic data that we have here. And so a quick overview of myself and this capacity, Erebor LLC, as the principal, and bringing to the table some years of experience in financial consulting around a number of different issues. Next slide, please. So when we think about, the first thing I want to set the perspective on future revenues, one thing is to look at sort of the overarching economic patterns we've seen. And one is we've had an unprecedented recovery from the COVID-19 recession in 2020, funded, we had a large amount of injection of capital and other resources were marshaled to result in very rapid economic growth. This growth is slowing, and there's consequences of that. But first is that the blue line here is real GDP growth. Real GDP measures the total value of goods and services in an economy, and it's real because it subtracts the effect of inflation. And so at the end of the day, what we end up with is sort of a real number of what we expect. And although we expect growth to be slow and positive, it's not expected to go negative anytime shortly, we expect it to slow down significantly. Inflation, of course, especially if you've read today's headlines as well as recently, inflation is a primary concern. And one thing that we look at as we look towards economic growth is inflation erodes some of that economic growth. It makes our GDP projections smaller, because when we take out that inflation section and it's bigger and we have to account for it, our real GDP goes down. And we expect inflation to sort of hit a maximum in 2022 before kind of going back to hopefully in the long term more reasonable levels. And I'll explain this in a little bit more detail about why we think that's the case. And I think one of the most other factor to note in this is that our economic report regarding the job market remains incredibly strong. In addition to mixed economic news in general, you'll likely hear in the next few months that we probably hit the 50-year low regarding unemployment rate across the US economy. The economy remains incredibly strong. There are over 11 million open jobs, about 2 available jobs for every available person. There's a mismatch of resources there, but it becomes an important issue to consider. Next slide, please. So one characteristic, especially locally, is looking at how Santa Fe's unemployment has changed. Over time, we often see seasonal employment coming in, more workers looking for jobs when they might be available in summer, those numbers falling back in December. Why you see kind of a wave or shark tooth-like pattern here. The pandemic of 2020 stands out. It looks like a mountain on this map. That shows you to how badly the Santa Fe economy was affected by the pandemic. Since that time period, at least in the regards of our last year, total non-farm employees in Santa Fe have increased about 11%. In some sectors that were particularly heavy hit, like leisure and hospitality, which are the sectors that include things like restaurants and hotels, we've seen growth rates above 50% in terms of the number of workers employed in those categories in the last year. That is a recovery. Some sectors are actually now employing more workers than they were prior to the pandemic, notably trade, transportation, and retail. And those become important drivers of future revenues. A strong job market is ultimately what you look for. If people have jobs, they feel more confident spending. And when they feel more confident spending, that money comes through into our GRT revenues. So our next slide, please. And so when we look at New Mexico as a whole, Santa Fe has done pretty well. You'll notice that in the map of all 33 counties of our state to the right, you'll find that the darker colors indicate higher unemployment, lighter colors indicate lower unemployment. Many smaller or rural counties in eastern New Mexico have very low unemployment rates. But regarding where, say, the majority of New Mexicans live in the Rio Grande Valley, we have done quite well in our recovery, but we still lag the rest of the US economy. And there are some reasons for this. The demographics across the New Mexico economy are different than America as a whole. We have a greater proportion of government workers. There's fewer layoffs in bad times, and it takes longer to hire back, as well as sort of the industry dynamics. There are a few very large firms in that respect that can hire a lot of people very quickly, like you might see in other states. But the bottom line is unemployment remains low for New Mexico here in the blue line on top. And on the very bottom, when we look at new unemployment rate, people who are going on unemployment for the first time, we're seeing these levels at the same levels they were prior to the pandemic. So nearing a full economic employment situation for our local economy, which is very, very good. Next slide. So one source of concern and one source of things, we're going to talk about different things as we walk through this, has been real estate. We know that real estate prices across Santa Fe and across the country have been remarkably robust and have increased far beyond their sort of long-term average increases that we've seen. And initially, this was powered by very, very low interest rates. And what we've seen is that interest rates have come up quite a bit. And when interest rates come up, that reduces the purchasing power mortgage rates. When mortgage rates come up, this reduces the purchasing power to buy houses for consumers. And so we expect this will drastically slow real estate growth rate in the next year or two. The other consequence of this is supply. One of the ultimate deciding factors of real estate prices is the amount of homes you have available and the amount of people who want to buy them. So one thing that's been keeping prices elevated has been historically low supplies, not only across Santa Fe, across the state, but when we look at the United States as a whole, the amount of homes being offered for sale is very, very low. And so when we think about this taken in context and put together, this means that prices might remain elevated. We expect slower real estate price growth. And ultimately, one thing that we look for as we approach this is this does affect, say, property tax revenues that comes through the door. But property tax revenues don't exactly match real estate revenues because they're capped on the upside. We can't see more than 3% increases in tax rates in assessable taxable value on properties due to a legislative rule. So as a consequence, those revenues don't flow immediately into the city, but become part of the long-term dynamics for how property taxes increase in the long run. Next slide, please. So one thing in the Santa Fe area in particular, as people have met with and you've observed, is that we've seen quite a bit of construction. And construction since 2019 has been robust and very steady. And there are some good news overall. If we look at all the rest of the country, construction is expected to remain robust this year. But there is, as we look towards the future, there are some sources of concern. As the large builders look ahead and look at where mortgage rates are going over the next year or two, they're starting to make decisions involving long-term construction patterns, which might have an effect for us here in Santa Fe. For instance, if rates become too high or they expect supply or expect demand for housing to be reduced in a substantial way, they might not also provide enough supply. But so far, it seems like we're reaching more towards a gradual fizzling of real estate prices rather than something catastrophic. Next slide, please. So there's a few things that are important here. One is that the bottom line is higher mortgage rates. And we've seen mortgage rates, which is the top graph right there, increase drastically. For instance, they were below 3% for the early part of 2021. Now mortgage rates are at or around 5% in the 30-year mortgage rates. That's a substantial hit to the bottom line, especially for people looking for that first home. We expect that mortgage rates, because they become more expensive, this eats into purchasing power and this slows price growth. Supply is going to likely remain tight, though, even as demand falls. But another thing to think about that we just mentioned, we do expect in the long run, this does result in higher property tax revenue, but subject again to New Mexico valuation caps of about 3% per year or 6% every 2 years. So it does increase things like one silver lining in something that is very costly for most Americans is housing, but it does help boost the revenue in the long run of Santa Fe. Next slide, please. One thing of note in particular, of course, in the economy of Santa Fe is the importance of the tourism sector. And what we've seen is a drastic recovery, an incomplete recovery. And I don't need, and there are many reasons for that, but it has been a drastic recovery since 2020. So if we look at the chart on the right, this is taken from data from Open Table, which measures the amount of seated diners we have in an economy relative to a previous level. And I turn this into an index so we can kind of follow it along together like we would any other graph. But in this example, you'll notice that after the pandemic, both across the United States in blue and in New Mexico in orange, the total number of diners just collapsed. That followed by a period of recovery, then another COVID variant and additional closings. But since that time, and especially since if we really look at the last year, we've seen not only the restaurant sector has improved to a level that reached its pre-pandemic level. On some weekends and at some times it does exceed it. And New Mexico and total New Mexico values look very favorably when compared to the United States as a whole. We've recovered as well as the rest of the country, sometimes even more so. Dining in New Mexico has recovered back to pre-pandemic levels, and high hotel occupancy rates are likely to continue as we approach fiscal year 2023. What this means is one of those revenue sources, or one of the ways we measure it, might be RevPAR, it might be the revenue per room, but those numbers are sufficiently high and sufficiently growing to a level where lodgers tax takings should about reach or potentially exceed what they were before the pandemic, which is very good news regarding lodgers tax. Next slide, please. Now, the headline number today is on consumer prices and inflation. If you saw the numbers from today or read about them, you saw that our last 12 months, we grew at about an 8.5% inflation rate. We hit another 40-year high for inflation. And how do we measure inflation, and where does it come from, and what should we focus on? So consumer price index, which is the consumer price index, the CPI, which is our sort of aggregate measure of a basket of goods represented that a consumer would buy in a given time period, is used to measure inflation across the economy. We've seen a huge amount of inflation in two particular sectors. The first is energy, where gas prices are about 48% higher than they were last year. The second is food, which is about 11% higher than where they were last year. Both of those things disproportionately affect poorer New Mexicans and poorer Santa Feans as a proportion of their total paycheck. However, there is some news that we can report in general. When we take those two items away, food and energy, we have something called core inflation. Core inflation ended up being a little bit lower than expected, and also lower than many people anticipated in today's report. What that means is that we hope that in the next couple months, we'll kind of reach an apex on inflation before it starts trending down. Looking forward, one of the big risks that we have in the economy is looking at service sector rather than goods sector inflation. So goods, stuff that people make, has absorbed most of that inflation cost right now. But as it approaches services, the things that people do and spend money on, we expect that that might be a significant factor. Much of our inflation is due to temporary factors still. Headline inflation is likely to fall in the coming months. Energy and vehicles reported some of the highest increases over the year, but in the last month, used vehicle prices have started to come down by about 4%. We expect that to happen. We've seen gas prices fall off their top yields, so we expect that this will continue. It has disproportionately affected two sectors, which are very important for Santa Feans in particular. And that leads us to the next slide, please. Is inflation in oil. So when we think about inflation in oil prices are very unpredictable, notoriously unpredictable because they rely very heavily on geopolitical events. So even if I look at a chart, just because of the variability in oil and I make a model and I think it's really cleverly designed, it's going to be wrong. And we're really even bad at consensus estimates on expectations as a field. But these demands and another way to look at this is that inflation as a whole, and what does it do overall to the Santa Fe revenue structure? It increases GRT revenue. Goods prices are more expensive, so more revenue flows to the city. However, on the other side, consumers are sensitive to price changes, which means that as inflation rises, people start cutting back in certain sectors. Right now, when people are asked in poll after poll and through economic behavior studies, people do shift from luxury goods into what we call essential items as inflation increases. So we expect, especially one thing that's concerning about when we have inflation this high, wage growth is growing, but it's not keeping up with inflation. And we actually have reported a real average hourly earnings are down almost 3% year on year because inflation is growing faster even than wages are growing. It also makes, even though more GRT revenue might flow to the city, it makes things more expensive. And that's the other thing to think about. So oil prices and energy costs affect most sectors of the economy. And so they're notoriously unpredictable. We think that right now the market's priced in current demand well and the current geopolitical sanctions. One thing to look out for is what happens in summer, particularly if there are other geopolitical risks or concerns that could drive energy costs up further. But right now, we think that most of this is priced in. And right now, we're still optimistic that as we kind of cross this boundary into the end of the year, some of those inflation numbers will come down. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide, I promise. I know I know it's riveting as all of this economic data might be, but this is the ultimate question of the next year is going to be built on the question of monetary policy. And so the Federal Reserve has to thread the needle. And what I mean by that, the Fed has control over one monetary policy rate, which is overnight lending to large banks, which we call the discount rate, which has in turn an effect on the rest of the economy. When the Fed raises rates, what that does is it makes projects more expensive across the economy. There's less economic activity and it slows growth, but it also slows inflation. And when they lower rates, they do it because they make money cheaper. More people want to do more different types of projects. That's used to stimulate the economy. Right now, the Fed raised rates once in March. They're expected to continue to do so this year. And what that's likely to do is it will be in response and help control inflation across the economy. But if they raise rates too quickly, one risk is that this increases the likelihood of a bad economic outcome. And a good example of this would be a recession. One thing that's predicted every recession since 1955, with the exception of one, was what's called an inverted yield curve. So a yield curve is basically a connect the dots representation of different types of government debt and what they're yielding, or how much the government has to pay people for buying the debt from them. And so right now, if we go back in the past in those gray lines, we had a normal environment that was upwardly sloping yield curves. Rates were low short term, rates were high on the long term. That's what we expect. That means growth is priced into the economy, and we expect the economy will grow. What's happened is the yield curve has kind of flattened out a bit. And we're keeping an eye on this because with that, economists have also raised the expectations of potential recessions. Right now, the consensus is there's only a 28% chance of a recession in the next year, but it is on the horizon as a downturn risk. The Fed is confident, on the other hand, that they can raise rates in a way that won't adversely affect our economy too much. Raising rates too slowly, on the other hand, which is also a risk, allows higher inflation to persist for a longer run and can hurt people's bottom lines. And so if you can imagine what it's like in the federal policy chair, you have all of this information, and I would almost create an analog to this as you're sort of, trying to change the trajectory of a cannonball mid-air based on new information that comes out to you, knowing that some of that information is incomplete. The Fed will do its best job to do it in such a way where the rates come up informed by the economic situation in a way that controls inflation while also ensuring they don't tip the economy too much into a recession. But it will be very important to watch this in the coming year, particularly what the Fed does, because one risk in the long run, 1, 2, 3 years out, and while it's not currently an expected risk, and we do expect growth in the long run, is recessionary risks. And what we see continuously is the one surefire thing that reduces, say, GRT or lodgers tax revenues is a recession. But on the other side of that, we are optimistic the Fed will be able to do a decent job with that. So that's kind of an overall perspective as to where we stand, driving factors of revenues over the next year, sources for concern, but an overall kind of idea of where we're going.
Thank you, Dr. White. Appreciate you taking the time to share with us today and give us an orientation of where we stand now versus where we are headed into fiscal year 23. Next, I'm going to ask our Assistant Director, Alexis Lotero, and Bradley Flitch, our Investment and Planning Officer, to give us an overview of our revenue.
Next slide, please. The budgeted FY23 all funds revenue of $382 million reflects an increase of $21 million or 6% when compared to our pre-pandemic levels of FY19. This increase reflects a significant recovery since the downturn. We're in good shape. The budgeted FY23 all funds revenue reflects a decrease of $3.5 million or 0.9% when we compare it to FY22 mid-year budget, where we utilized a lot of one-time reserves to fund the items that Director McCoy identified earlier. Santa Fe's largest funding source is tax revenue, accounting for 44% of all revenue. It's that big blue piece on the pie chart. Of that category, 81% comes from gross receipts taxes, 7% from property taxes, and 12% from other taxes such as the lodger's tax. Service fees, primarily from the city's utilities, account for 35% of the total revenue. Next slide, please. For the general fund, the budgeted FY23 revenue of $124 million reflects an increase of $19.5 million or 18.7% when we compare it to the FY22 mid-year budget. The general fund's largest funding source, similarly, is GRT revenue, accounting for 83% of all revenues. In FY22, Santa Fe's GRT has also been bolstered by the inclusion of internet sales taxes, which contributed to elevated GRT levels and will continue to do so. So prior to this fiscal year, we received a distribution, a set distribution from the state. Now we're getting it based on the actual retail sales. And with that, I will turn it over to Brad.
Ms. Lotero, if I can actually interject, just to underscore something that you touched upon. We used a sizable amount of reserves in the last 2 fiscal years, actually, but in the current fiscal year. And just as a reminder to the group and to those watching, our reserves are intentionally built up during years of revenue growth, during the good times, with the prospect of using those reserves to help us during the times of financial hardship or financial uncertainty. So over the last few years, the city's has built up our what we consider to be our rainy day funds or our cash reserves, which has enabled the city to continue to invest in our core services, everything from our basic city services to additional funding to support any needs that arose during the pandemic. That being said, the budgetary numbers that Ms. Lozzetto reviewed with you for the overall decrease from FY22 to FY23 is because we are accounting for about 40 million out of reserves as of mid-year for those projects that we discussed earlier. The airport, BC Pool, the teen center, all of those were driving up the one-time expenses, sometimes capital in nature, that we have invested in the current fiscal year. And that's why year over year it is showing as a decrease to our all funds that Ms. Lozzetto mentioned earlier. So just wanted to clarify that it's not that we are actually anticipating any less revenue or any less investments in some of our departments. It is really sometimes federal fund decreased, and other times these one-time capital purchases are accounted for in those FY22 mid-year numbers that are one-time in nature. With that, Mr. Flitch, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Director McCoy. Good afternoon, Chairman, councilors. It really cannot be understated the impact the internet sales have had on the city's GRT revenue. Retail sales are coming in roughly 35% higher month over month than the prior year. I attribute most of that to internet sales. That increase is generating about 1.1 million per month in additional distribution to the city compared to prior years. As before, Director McCoy said, there are three types of industries in Santa Fe: those that never declined, such as construction. They remained strong throughout the pandemic. Others took a decline right at the beginning, but recovered after 1 year. And then there are those that didn't recover for 2 years. And that would be the accommodation, food service, arts and entertainment, recreation. They have all come back. Even healthcare has come back to pre-pandemic levels. With healthcare, we saw a lot of delays of elective surgeries. Those are now being, people are getting them done. And then there's industries like professional, scientific, and technical services that have just been absolute powerhouses and are up nearly 100% in the 2-year period of time in their total gross receipt. And they're in the businesses' gross receipts. Overall, Santa Fe's businesses have recovered from the pandemic and appear to be returning to their normal growth rates. And so that's the strength in GRT. Lodgers tax, finance staff remains cautious with lodgers tax, but it appears that lodgers tax revenue will be a record for FY22, exceeding FY23's forecast by over $1 million. In speaking with the Director of Tourism, Randy Randall, he's shown me his data where he could come in as high as 14.4 million in lodgers tax revenue, and that would eclipse prior year's highest of 12.8 million. Lodgers revenue is based on occupancy and revenue per room. Occupancy has been strong, but Randy's data shows that prices, the price paid per room, is very strong. And the two combined is why lodgers tax is so strong this year. As Dr. White had said, property tax is pretty stable. It does not react to the whims of the economy, especially now with the rate of price increase that we've seen here in the city and the county. The taxable amount of value can only go up by 3% per year by statute. In the future, when that home is sold, the city will see a reset of that property tax, but that's who knows, well into the future when the property is sold. Taxable value for both residential and commercial property in the city of Santa Fe exceeded $13.5 billion. The taxable value is a third of that, or about $4.5 billion. And so in that, Santa Fe is in a strong position to continue, and the revenues appear at this time recurring, and that they will continue to be so. We are keeping an eye on demographic trends and see if we can see if some of the migration continues. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Flitch. Next, we'll move on to an expenditure overview. Andy Hopkins will guide us through all funds as well as the general fund to be able to then dive into some of the more exciting slides of today, which really gets into the meat of what we are investing in FY23. So Andy, go ahead and take it over.
Thank you, Mary. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Finance Committee. As you can see here, our FY23 recommended all funds expenditures total $382.8 million, which surpasses pre-pandemic levels by $25.5 million. So that's great news. The recommended all funds expenditures reflects an increase of 7.1% when compared to pre-pandemic levels in FY19. This is our effort to leverage increased resources to invest in critical community priorities. The salaries and benefits comprise, as you can see, the largest share of all funds expenditures at 35%. Those are the blue and red pieces of the pie there. Contractual services represent the next largest share at 12%. Other large shares of the budget include other operating costs and insurance, each of which take up 10%. You can see those in the kind of brownish gray slide or piece of the pie and the dark blue piece of the pie. The other operating costs, as we've discussed in previous years, do include a variety of things such as printing and publishing and advertising. They also include charges for internal services such as fleet and IT that are charged to other city departments to support their operations, such as, the police fleet, maintaining the police fleet, or IT maintaining the computers, cell phones, and other IT related items throughout the city. That category also does include small equipment purchases. Next slide. In the general fund, our total expenditures total $124 million. The budget does ensure that the general fund reserves meet the 10% council imposed mandate of additional reserves that are unallocated for emergency purposes or what have you. This is over and above the state requirement of 1/12, which is approximately 8.3% reserve. So we do maintain a slightly higher reserve than the state requires. The overall budget for the general fund of $124 million does reflect a decrease of $4.8 million or 3.7% from the FY22 budget levels at mid-year, which, as previously noted, utilized one-time reserves to support expenditures. Once again, even more prominent here is that salaries and benefits, even more so in the general fund, comprise the vast majority of general fund expenditures. Those are the blue and red pieces of the pie there. As you can see, the blue alone salaries represents a significant share. Overall, the two comprise 65% of expenditures. Once again, as in all funds, contractual services represent the second largest share of the budget at 12%, and other operating costs round up the top three with 10%.
Thank you, Andy. I also wanted to highlight that based on our work this year with Dr. White, we also decided to make across the board changes for fuel. So with those categories, what you'll see in each of the different departments is an average of 30% for gasoline and CNG and about 50% a year-over-year increases for diesel. And that was informed by the work that we've done with Dr. White to be able to understand how inflation in certain sectors will be impacting the increased costs for the city of Santa Fe's department's budgets. Next slide, please. I did want to highlight as well, as Andy has mentioned, salaries and benefits are the lion's share of some of our funds, including the largest fund, our general fund. This year, we are, because of the current labor market, the city is continuing the retention and hiring incentives to fill these critical positions and to make sure we retain our employees that are so valuable to the city. In addition, we are including an equivalent to a 16% salary and salary dependent benefits, which is that $2.3 million number that you see for the police department's POA. We are also including an 8% for both equivalent of 8% for both AFSCME and the fire union. All three of those allocations will have to be negotiated through the collective bargaining process. In addition to those three, the department budgets already include the equivalent of an 8% raise for all exempt and non-union city employees. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So now we're going to go over a few of the highlights with you. These are the different budget priority categories, if you will. We are continuing our investment into housing and livable neighborhoods and manageable, graceful growth through a $3 million allocation into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. This continues the commitment that the city has made in the past few years to support the work that's being done and funded through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We're also investing in the growth management and code update, as well as our general plan amendment. And new to the investment list this year is an allocation for neighborhood-based planning, as well as a downtown plan. In addition, we are continuing to support the functions in our land use department with on-call consulting services, as well as a few other allocations for ongoing day-to-day work in their for their digital services, as well as some scanning services in the plat room. If we can move on to the next slide, please. As far as our investments in our economic policy to create jobs and careers in the city, we continued our partnership with the state to fund different LEDA projects, including Marty's Mills, Beck and Billow, and our other growing businesses here in Santa Fe. We are also supporting the department initiatives for business incubation and small business recovery. We also are continuing the work for redevelopment at Midtown, as well as doing the phase 2 of the economic development strategic plan. Next slide, please. We are continuing the work with an additional funding for CHART in FY23. We are also investing, because of the increase in lodgers tax, the two areas that we are very excited to resume pre-pandemic levels of spending is in lodgers, both lodgers funded departments, which is tourism and arts and culture. So we do have additional investments by over 500,000, for example, for art and public places and arts and culture, and several key initiatives in tourism, such as OTAP. Next slide, please. We are continuing our investments as is outlined in our city ordinances to the Children, Youth, and Commission grant program, as well as the Health and Human Services grant program. These are two sizable city initiatives and priorities, 1.6 million for CYC and 1.3 million for Health and Human Services. We are continuing programs for veterans assistance, as well as a sizable commitment for our libraries for new books and subscriptions. And we have also highlighted in these slides, as I mentioned previously, the city is proposing to add 20 FTE, 20 positions. So in each of these slides, we've outlined where and which programs will be adding the FTE. Here, we're going to add, in this particular policy area, a program manager for youth and family services, as well as seniors transportation manager for our seniors program. As far as our commitments to sustainability, this is a sizable investment of $500,000 to the Clean Energy Fund. This fund will be used to reduce the city's carbon footprint and move towards our 2040 carbon neutral goals. In addition, we are continuing our efforts for cleaner energy through funding the CNG station lease that we have, as well as continuing the investments that have begun with the LED lights initiative and continued solarization initiatives in public works. We also have a strong commitment to keep our city safe and secure in various different ways. This plays out in our police and fire departments and our emergency management department, everything from a wildfire evacuation analysis to a police department substation in City Hall, to a new program for a first responder down payment assistance. And that's $750,000 that we are proposing to be invested. And everything from adding new positions to support our evidence room improvements to purchasing cleaner vehicles for the police department and body cameras. Next slide, please. As always, each budget year, we continue to make improvements in serving the city through our basic services, as well as upgrading our infrastructure. So here's a summary of what some of those investments are for this year. As I mentioned earlier, we are centralizing and creating a graffiti section in the Parks and Open Space division. We're adding capacity to our airport, as well as increasing our investments through service contracts at the MRC, through seasonal employees in the Parks division, as well as an additional allocation of over $600,000 to support Parks operations. Throughout both these expenditures you'll really see throughout both Public Works and the Public Utilities Department. We're going to dive into Public Utilities today, so I'll just go ahead and go to the next slide. Here, we always have a commitment to making our city government work better for our citizens through an increase in our investments in our underlying software platforms, our technology, and how we service the community through our community engagement. So here we are adding a few positions into the community engagement department. We are adding capacity to upgrade our software system, the Tyler Munis financial system, and our human capital system as well. We are funding Spanish language translation, or continuation of our funding of Spanish language translation in our community engagement department, as well as continuing programs to solicit feedback about our city services in the Happy or Not program. Next slide, please. This slide contains an outline of our 2-week schedule. As Chair Romero-Worth did indicate, we will be meeting Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday for the next few weeks. We do have a very assertive schedule to get through each of the departments through in these afternoon time slots, but we do have Tuesday, April 26th from 1 to 4 as a follow-up in case we have any outstanding matters to take up on that day. Next slide, please. And just like last year at this time, I do want to make a commitment to submit the city's budget to the Department of Finance and Administration by the end of May. as well as to continue to monitor both of our assumptions around revenue as well as our actual expenditures each month. We will be reviewing and closing on a quarterly basis our financials and doing a review of our revenue to date, just like we did this year, and bringing forward different rounds of budget adjustments if we are able to, given the revenue picture at the time. So this is the timeline. This is essentially what we've kept to this year as well. And we're making that commitment, if possible, to, given our revenue picture next year, do the same. I did want to just call the committee's attention to a possible, or the GRT bond, the gross receipts tax backed bond that will be coming through the Finance Committee and the Public Works and Public Utilities Committee for a possible market sale date of fall of 2022. With that, Madam Chair, we stand for any questions.
Okay, if we can stop sharing screen, that'd be great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for that very layered presentation. We've covered quite a bit of ground. We do have a few minutes to take some questions about all of that from the committee, if there are questions. Otherwise, we will, and we don't have, as I'm saying, I'm going to try to keep us on time. We do still need to get to the utilities budget, and then we do have the unions prepared, I believe, to speak to us. I want to make sure that we leave enough time for them to be heard, and also for us to finish at 4 o'clock. I chair another city committee that starts at 4 o'clock, so we do need to keep pretty close to time. Tomorrow, we will have the council meeting run right up within an hour of this meeting, so staying on time, I just will emphasize again, is going to be very important. So again, I won't belabor this anymore. Do we have questions on anything that's been presented so far from the committee? Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I guess I just thank you for the presentations. I know we all got the budget book fairly close to the time we're actually making decisions and hearing presentations. So I think we do need to make time for that for sure, because I'm just starting to get into some of the details. So I think that we'll just have to make time for that. I had a question about the reserves. There was, I don't quite understand. We used to have 40 million in reserves. And then we utilized that last year in the different, or last budget cycle or fiscal year. And so we're replenishing that with cash reserves, but this one said that for this budget that we're only adding 26,000 into cash reserves. So what does that make our balance? Is it up to 40,000 again? Or can you explain that a little bit more?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, thank you for that question. Our reserves, as I mentioned briefly, are built up during the good years in order to support city expenses, so we don't have to face a severe decrease due to a decrease in revenue or a decrease in or any type of uncertainty in our revenue outlook. So we have used over the previous few years reserves to support ongoing operations, to support operations that would otherwise have been supported with recurring revenue. That being said, a few of the projects that we have been able to support with these reserves have been the airport expansion, the teen center, Southside Teen Center, as well as the bicentennial pool, as far as the one-time expenses. There were other items, for example, in public works like road rehabilitation that we have also funded in the fall. We funded 3 million. I believe the majority of those projects have already been completed. Those would fall into the bucket of recurring expenses that we generally fund with recurring revenue if we have the recurring revenue to support it. So that's generally how those how we have spent those reserves. For example, we had a one-time revenue that went into reserves from this settlement from with the taxation and revenue department with GRT. That totaled over $2.5 million. We used $2.4 million of that to fund the one-time expenses of the retention incentive and the hiring incentive in December. So that's an example of how we continuously monitor what we have in reserves and what we can use it on, preferably on one-time expenses like the capital outlay. That being said, how do we build up reserves? How we build up reserves is very, very important for the committee to understand. For example, this year, citywide, we have over a 20% vacancy rate. So whereas we had budgeted for those positions, and we saw in the charts and graphs that Mr. Hopkins reviewed with you, that salaries and benefits are the largest expense of the general fund and a sizable share of all 70 funds. So when we have a vacancy rate of over 20%, and the funds are not utilized for other one-time expense to cover one-time expenses, for example, purchasing police vehicles or addressing other one-time needs in the current year, that funding then gets transferred into reserves. So that's how we are able to replenish the reserve level and then be able to deploy it in subsequent years.
So I guess back to my question, what's our balance right now? So it says we're adding 26,000 into cash reserves. So what does that bring our reserve balance to?
Yes, so I am happy to report that unlike in prior years where we have been taking out of reserves to fund our operations or to fund one-time expenses, we're actually for the first time in 2 to 3 years adding to reserves to the tune of the 26,000. That being said, our reserve levels for the general fund meet and actually exceed, I believe Mr. Hopkins has that exact number of what the 10% reserve requirement. Andy, if you can pull that number up.
And that 10% reserve requirement, is that we're meeting that by adding the 26,000 in this budget cycle?
That, yes. So if you can bear with me, we have 10% reserve requirement, I believe, of close to 12 million because our general fund expenditures exceed 120 million. Andy, is that accurate?
Yes, sorry, my computer is being a little bit slow here. Yes, the general fund 10% reserve based on our current budgeted or our FY23 budget is $11.9 million. Our beginning cash at the balance at the beginning of this year is approximately $12.5 million. So with the FY23 budget in the general fund alone, just looking at the general fund alone, we are basically going to have, with our budgeted levels as they are, approximately $500,000 or $570,637 over and above our 10% reserve in the general fund.
So what's the balance then? Sorry, you threw out a bunch of numbers. Can you say what the balance is then with this fiscal year increase?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, at this point, we do not have audited balances. We only have preliminary balances for our for the beginning of the year. Let me just pull that up.
And Madam,
you can share.
Briefly,
share.
Madam Chair, Councilor, why don't we do this? Because this is always been, I believe, these we had these conversations last year as well. Why don't we create a table and share that with the committee so we can outline the beginning balance and the revenue into the fund and then the 10% reserve requirement. and then where we anticipate based on budget ending FY23. I believe if we put it into a table and it is in writing and sent to you via email, you'll actually be able to see it. If you have any questions on that, we can circle back to that in a future meeting.
That'd be great.
Okay,
And also
great.
what
Thank
reserves actually can cover.
Of
What's
course.
the requirements for that?
Yes.
That would be helpful. And then the other question I had is just how the budget changes, even last year when we had CARES Act, and then how it changes again with ARPA, and if that affected our decisions on what we spent this year, our expenditure budget.
Madam Chair, Councilor, can you clarify your question?
I'm just curious if, we've been getting a lot of federal funding, which has been very helpful to stabilize the city. And part of that also worries me because we have gotten this infusion of funding that has helped us operationally, it's helped us programmatically, it's helped us with emergency responses to the pandemic. And I'm just curious how the budget was shaped based on that funding source, those funding sources that we're getting, which are temporary. I mean, we're going to get them. ARPA is going to be utilized in the next couple of years. So how does that then overarching, just the overall plan of putting the budget together, how did those affect decisions?
Madam Chair, Councilor, we, as I mentioned, we're looking at 23 and beyond as really these transformational years for Santa Fe, primarily because of the level of federal funding that will be available. As you mentioned, last year we were able to deploy $17.5 million of CARES Act money within 3 months. In addition to that, we are going to be deploying over the next 2.5 years, $15 million in the American Rescue Plan Act funding that has been allocated to the city of Santa Fe. Additionally, other programs, for example, the airport, transit, or CDBG received an additional amount of funding from the CARES Act. And we anticipate that going forward, whether it be allocations from the state's share of the ARPA dollars or direct allocations from the federal agencies, the city may also be recipients of additional ARPA dollars. The next round is then the federal infrastructure money that's going to be coming down the pipeline. So this really is a period very similar to how we saw after the 2008 recession, where a sizable amount of federal funding is being deployed to be able to keep our economy sound, but also to make these critical investments, whether it's in infrastructure or in social services. And so that being said, we don't look at each round. Of course, ARPA was looked at, in its entirety for the purposes and how we needed to meet the moment that we were in with the onset of the pandemic. Very similar now with ARPA. I think a lot of what we are seeing as a result of COVID were some of the disparities that we saw really exacerbated, that we knew were present in our society, were really exacerbated with the onset of the pandemic. And so we are using this one-time $15 million over the next 2.5 years to be able to address that. That being said, there is an initiative in the city manager's budget to coordinate with a consulting firm to be able to help us go after additional federal money. This has really opened up the city of Santa Fe's eyes to how transformational federal funding can be for our organization. So with that, I do hope that, what we saw with the CARES Act and now with ARPA and any future infrastructure dollars is just the starting point for really being able to tap another one of our revenue streams into the city to be able to expand the types of services that we are able to provide to Santa Feans.
Thank you. I think just the overview of that is helpful. I guess I'm just curious how it then influenced how we shaped our budget for the city this fiscal year. Did we decide to just go? It sounds like we just did as much as possible since we do have more funding coming in this year, but we're not guaranteed next year to have that. So I guess I'm just curious, did we try to cover as much as possible with new programs and new concepts and studies and increases in salary because we felt like we had the money now versus maybe potentially next year, as was indicated by the presentation about exercising caution in response to mixed economic signals. So I guess I'm just curious if that was the approach, like spend it now because we have it and we have these other federal reserves, or yeah, I guess that's kind of my thought process of my questioning.
Madam Chair, Counselor, we definitely utilized smartly how each of our dollars coming in terms of our recurring revenue to match it to recurring expenses. For example, the salary increases, the compensation package that we outlined. That being said, we really are going to look ahead to build our capacity to access additional federal dollars in the years ahead. We really have seen how transformational that can be. And so we hope that to continue that. That really is about capacity building and being able to understand where the federal money is and how to go after it most proactively and most effectively across all of our departments to expand these services. So yes, we maximize our recurring dollars in revenue that we know we can count on from year to year. And then we also try to maximize any type of non-recurring revenue, such as federal grants or even capital outlay dollars for the state. So you're right on there.
Great, thank you.
I'll just add that we are going to spend a day we have on our agenda diving into the ARPA money specifically. So I think that will help you see how it is being used and kind of the responsible nature and philosophy behind how that money was used and what the future plan is for the things that are funded with it. So I think that may also help answer your question, Councilwoman.
Is that separate description for ARPA in our packet in the budget book?
Madam Chair, Counselor, that will actually not be included in the FY23 budget. We are planning to bring, but it will be a budget hearing. It's inherently different, a different color of money because it is a federal grant. So we are bringing that forward as an FY22 budget adjustment. The goal is to view it in light of the recurring operating costs that we are bringing forward in the 23 budget, but also be able to understand the additional work that our team is going to be investing in, all of the hours and the effort that it takes to deploy these resources as well. And so we're going to be, but that will be through an FY22 budget adjustment, because the game plan is to start working on deploying these resources in the event that this is passed in April. At the end of April, to be able to deploy that 15 million or start the hard work that it takes to deploy those dollars starting in May.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. Good to hear that we'll get a separate presentation. And just so you know, John Blair, there is a person that actually is a grant expert that we can work with that can tell us about all the grants that we are actually eligible for the city. And I have her name, so I can give you that contact info. Thank you. That's all I have for now.
Great. Councillor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. I won't take long. This first hour and a half has gone by very fast. I just want to take a second to thank the folks that put this budget together. What a mammoth amount of work. Unbelievable. I don't know if you wrote letters home to your families or how you communicated with them, but I know that you haven't seen much of them. Between this and the audit, I really applaud this group. It's been astounding dedication, and it doesn't go unnoticed. All kinds of information given today. You know, I just wanted to say that the one thing that really kind of perked up my ears when with the information was in terms of revenue, we get 7% of our revenue from property tax, and we get 12% of our revenue from lodgers tax. I think that probably most of the public has no feeling for that whatsoever. That I think that that's something that's important to point out, that we are very dependent on our lodger's tax. Our hands are a little bit tied in how we're able to spend it, but nonetheless, 12% in lodger's tax and 7% in property tax. That was kind of one of those interesting points that I hadn't really thought about before. So thank you, Chair, for letting me make a comment.
Thank you, Counselor. Other questions from the committee? I don't see anybody waving at me. I don't see any other hands up. Again, we have already eaten in an hour and a half. Let's move to the public utilities budget. Counselor, if you can take your hand down, that will help me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If we can allow admittance to as a panelist, Shannon Jones, as well as Jesse Roach, Michael Dozier, Neil Denton, and Charlene Sitton. Thank you, Alex.
Do we know that that's happening?
I will call.
Thanks. Our Zoom host may have stepped away. We'll get Mary so she can co-host in the future. There we go. Starting to see our team populate, but we don't have our fearless leader yet. Director Jones, I don't see him yet. He's still in no man's land. Did we lose him? Okay, we'll stand in place here for a minute. Marion, can you make sure you're a co-host going forward? There we go. There's Director Jones. Are you with us? Director Jones? Can you hear me?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm here.
There you are. Terrific. Welcome.
Apologize for the delay.
No worries. We had a little technical difficulty, but we're ready. Looks like your team is in place, and we would very much like to hear the presentation on your budget when you're ready. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, governing body. I believe there was a couple other people that may be in the waiting room, Nancy Jimenez and possibly Maya Martinez, just to mention. But I will say I was a little bit excited hearing Mary call out the individuals, Director McCoy calling out the individuals to join. That was like an all-star game lineup as my team comes in, as our team comes in. But so as we ramp up, I think, so public utilities, so I think the work that they do, definitely it's hard to do the work that they do, but I will say it is harder to verbalize the work that they do and give it any justice. But definitely, I appreciate the work that they do. I think the services that we provide maybe don't get noticed every day, but if it's ever a time that the service founders a little bit, then it's definitely noticed. But I do appreciate their work. And so I do have them here today to kind of speak about their portions, and I'm excited to hear what they say. I think you'll also see that they're excited about what they do. So I
Thank
think
you,
just a little bit of-
Director Jones. I think we are ready to share the PowerPoint presentation if we want to use that as a guide for today.
Okay, that is perfect. You can start the slide.
Great, thank you.
Just to make sure we cover the basis, and we can move to the next slide, but public utilities is made up of the water division, wastewater management, environmental services, utility billing, and the public utilities administration. Would point out again that environmental services, wastewater management, and the water division are true enterprise funds. Utility billing and the public utilities administration provide support services to those enterprise funds and are covered under by those enterprise funds. So we can go to the next slide. Public utilities is one of the larger departments with people and in money and in revenue. So we take that very serious. Public Utilities Department is coming forth with a recommended budget that totals $75.1 million that we will break down based on those sections. That will include investment strategies of an additional 2.7 million, an overall increase of about 7.3 million. I would like to just pause a second, if I may, to kind of recap. I do think that there's been a strategy over the last couple of years that we've taken on where we've definitely been diligent in what our revenues look like, making sure that we're understanding the impact of the environment that's around us. So I think that we historically over the past couple of years have made a couple dramatic reductions in the budget where we've kind of put pins on some of the things that we were ready to move forward with, but wanted to make sure it was the right time. Last year, we did see a slight increase, and this year we are looking to recommend an additional increase. But overall, I think my position would be is really probably just getting back to the operating budget, probably that I was recommending 2-3 years ago. But again, with that being said, the budget presented before you today does include a couple of things I would like to highlight while my staff will go into more detail. But this budget does include funding the 8% salary increase that was mentioned by Director McCoy and her team. For non-union and inventory exempt employees, the additional equivalent of 8% will be held by the HR budget if approved and applied depending on how the unions see fit to distribute that. An additional change that I would bring forth that bridges across is I am making a recommendation for an expansion of positions. I am recommending 2 full-time employees. These would be union positions. Both of them are journeyman electricians. And my intent is that I would have electricians on site at the water treatment facility on Canyon Road and the wastewater treatment facility on Paseo Rael. Currently, the utility does have a journeyman industrial electrician position at the Buckman director version. So I definitely see an advantage of that. Definitely, I would say there is an amplitude of work that could be done and some work to be managed by these journeyman electricians at both of those facilities. So again, overall positions, that would take the total to 258 full-time employees within the utility department. We can go to the next slide, please. So we'll take just a minute to speak on behalf of the Public Utilities Department's administration. And so ultimately the budget stayed relatively flat for the administration, which is really my direct report teams that provide support to the enterprise funds. So again, really not significant changes, a slight some decrease in insurance and wages that fluctuate. Finance does a great job of keeping us on track with those. A slight increased operating costs, which I will attribute mostly to like things are just a little bit more now than they were. The real significant difference is the debt service that increased by a little over $900,000, which is really the change in the budget. And that debt service is directly attributed to the solarization work that's being done by the city and utilities part in partnering with Public Works and the city as we look to solarize some of our facilities and take advantage of that green energy and those initiatives. I would like to, I guess, pause or maybe look for direction from Madam Chair or Director McCoy If we want to look at them as each section, or if you would like utilities to kind of present through, and then we could take questions as a whole. If there was a preference.
I'm going to defer to Mary, Director McCoy, about how she envisioned moving through this in the time that we've allotted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's go ahead and go through each of the divisions detail, which you have in front of you by category. And then we'll go ahead and circle back to the committee's questions as a whole.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you, Director McCoy, Madam Chair. So again, that's the highlight of the Public Utilities Administration. What I would like to do as the slide progresses is to turn you over to Director Sitton from Environmental Services.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thrilled to see you today and going first in the in the budget. I'm Shirley Sitton. I'm the Director of Environmental Services. We deliver collection services for trash and recycling for all commercial and residential customers in the city of Santa Fe. A few highlights from our budget. Some of our bigger operational expenses are, of course, it's titled landfill tipping fees, but that is actually all Santa Fe Solid Waste Management Agency fees. That includes recycling and other things. That has increased 1.5 million this year per our rate increase presentation, which we brought to you in January. Also included in our rate increase presentation was 2.5 million for large vehicles, but that is only up slightly from the FY22 budget, which we had 2.2 million, and is just getting us back on track for vehicle replacements from COVID era budgets. However, in tremendously increased prices in trucks and very slow order and delivery times will affect what, if any, trucks we will be able to buy this year. Worth mentioning, our expenses for inventory exempt have gone up slightly. That's for carts and dumpsters, and that too has been affected by supply chain issues. But on the upside, also a growing city. So we're struggling to keep up and trying to get ahead of the curve on having enough inventory for that. You might notice the Keep Santa Fe Beautiful grant. It's a small amount of money, but it is a reimbursement grant, and it looks a little different now. They've moved more money into supplies for cleanups in the median program. And just one of the great projects they've applied for, which actually went in this morning for the state grant, is beautification funds to assist the parks and open space on upgrading the MLK Park on the south side with native landscaping and art and other improvements. So they continue to do public art and things like that across the community. And really exciting in sustainability, there is a new expenditure you'll see for the Green Energy Fund. This expense is budgeted out of GRT and not our rate revenues. But building on the success of the Solarize program, the Green Energy Fund will allow a nonprofit partner to work in the community to create a green bank that can subsidize additional Solarize projects, as well as other energy efficiency upgrades for qualified residents, moving us much further towards our carbon reduction goals. And those are a few highlights. And with that, I'll stand for questions. Also, Neil Denton is here. If you have questions about the Green Energy Fund, he can really speak to that.
Director McCoy, I think we're not going to take questions per unit, are we? Maybe you should, let's present overall and then go back.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So if we can, wastewater management, Director Dozier, are you available to speak?
Yes, I am. I believe customer service was first in the.
Okay, I was just going in the order of my book.
I can present on mine. That's fine. All right, Madam Chair, members of the committee. So our main highlights are some additional funding that we're looking for, around 400,000, mainly working with the request for our master plan, access to future direction and planning for the facility, collection system, modifications, rehabilitations, and future treatment needs would be in the master plan. Another 150 would be working towards the supplemental needs of current employees for training and overview of the facility and work being done here at the facility to maintain compliance. And another portion of that same 150 would be going towards our grow your own hiring plan that we've been working with the past 6 months, trying to get employees with all the required levels or CDLs has been really difficult. So we've been reverting back to trying to grow those employees internally. And this past 6 months, we actually were very successful in getting 3 new hires and moving them all the way through to getting their CDLs this past week. So we want to keep that momentum going and keep it working towards that. Also, Director Jones did explain we're looking towards trying to get a journeyman electrician here at the site to help with having any kind of on-site immediate or emergency needs that we don't have to be calling contractors out to work on. If it's not such a big situation, like they can get in to a panel, work on a panel. The safety of having an electrician here is very important because we have high voltages, very dangerous work environments for anyone to be opening a panel, and you need to be a certified employee to get that work done. Now, the only other added piece is we're about 13.6 million is our request this year, and it's probably up about a little under 2 million from the actuals of 2020, 2021. And that's all I have for highlights at the moment. We can move on to the next presenter.
Terrific. And now I think in our books, the next thing that comes is, sorry, just turn the page, shouldn't do that. Wow, really turn the page. So the water division is what's next in our budget books, and then we'll do utility billing if that works.
Hello, Mr. Mayor, Madam Chair, members of the committee. The mission of the water division is to provide safe, reliable, and resilient water supply to meet the needs of the community. Our budget is fairly vanilla with the exception of the journeyman electrician position, which we're very excited about. And otherwise, we're kind of keeping things flat as we look at some major infrastructure spending coming down the pipe in the next few years. And with that, I think we can move to the next slide, and I will sort of leave the details there and stand for questions at the end.
Okay, and I do want to note that in the budget books, it does talk about the Buckman Direct Diversion facility, and I want to note that while city staff do populate that project, it does have an independent board made up of the partners in that project, and I think everybody should know how that works. And I note that there was something similar in environmental services about the Keep Santa Fe Beautiful board. And I just think we ought to make sure we understand how these structures work and how the different pieces of government work. So with that note, let's go on. Nancy Jimenez, the Utility Billing Division Director for Utility Billing. You're up.
Good afternoon, everyone. Our budget, of course, is pretty vanilla, just like Jesse did indicate. We do bill approximately 38,000 accounts per month for about 65 million per year. We do have 29 positions, of which 6 are vacant right now. I do potentially believe that we will probably be losing about 4 other individuals with either transfers or moving to different positions throughout the city. We're currently right now in the middle of our utility billing upgrade for our new utility billing software. We do anticipate that that will be finalized by the end of this calendar year. In the hopes that, it will be everything that they've promised us, which so far it looks like it is. And again, there will be some changes and some modifications that we will ask customers to do, primarily in setting up their automatic payments. They will have to go through a new process to do that from our current system into the new system. We will try and make that as easy and as, as quickly as possible for those customers, but there will be a little bit of a change happening. But of course, we will give plenty of information through the bills and through the website and, any other information that we can get out, we will get out as soon as possible. But with that, I stand for any questions.
Okay, I think we've covered all the divisions. If we can stop sharing screen, I think that will help. Director McCoy, we're ready for questions, correct? We've covered everybody?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Questions from the committee on this budget? Councilwoman Cassett.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Public Utilities, for being with us today and for presenting. I have one general overall question. So I mentioned 258 full-time positions with the addition of those 2 journeymen. I know that I've spoken with Director McCoy, and forthcoming will be a crosswalk of positions, but I was curious to hear what your vacancies are looking like in the department, and maybe break it down into division. I know Nancy had mentioned what it looked like in billing, but I'd like to hear what the picture is looking like throughout the rest of the department.
Madam Chair, Councilor Cassett, what I'll do is I'll begin, but I would like for, I think each of the directors have their specific ones because it's not broad, definitely across the disciplines. There are some positions definitely harder to fill than others. Director Dozier kind of mentioned things, special license like commercial driver's license, state certifications, engineering licensors. Those typically seem to be the harder ones. And so I am working with the directors to try to determine, is there another path to success? So again, Mr. Dozier talked about a program where we really mimic some of what transit has been doing, and even our environmental services department, where can we hire an individual without a commercial driver's license, and what can we do to help facilitate those individuals to be successful? So he mentioned about just recently, right, having 3 individuals kind of walk through, and we're helping them get the license that we need, as opposed to requiring people to bring those to the table. A couple of other modifications is really looking at the positions that we have and the work that needs to be done. So a couple of other things we have in the work. Licensed engineers are a tough one for me as well. And so talking with the engineer supervisors, they serve in different roles, but one of the roles that they serve is in project managing, right? Just helping us manage our projects. And not always does that require a licensed professional engineer. And so we have kind of modified our thinking and our approach to see that maybe we don't request an engineer. We work with HR and finance to take a reclass and put it out as a project manager, which the city already has job descriptions and minimum requirements for. Ultimately, I would say like casting a different net to see if we can get a different outcome. And so I do think that some of those have worked for us. So just recently, well, for me specifically, I'm probably, I would say, maybe I'm in a better position than some of the department directors, where really I only have 7 direct reports out of the 260 something positions. So 7 direct reports is actually really nice, coming from a place when, we used to have 15 or 20 direct reports. I did have 1 vacancy. And so that, for my administration, if there's only 7 people in that department, 1 position really skews the percentage. Where again, like water division is 128 employees. If he has 1 vacancy, it doesn't really move the percentage. But I will say, So I did have a vacancy for almost a year. And about 2 weeks ago, we were able to fill that vacancy with a very highly qualified. Her name is Sandra Gavalon. She is our regulatory compliance specialist. And so she's been with us almost 2 weeks now. Really excited. I've met with her a couple of times. And in addition, Mike Dozier had the ability to hire an engineer associate. So again, this is someone who has their engineering degree, but not quite the New Mexico State professional license. So he also started a couple weeks ago. So these are some of the wins. But again, ultimately, hopefully that gave the directors enough time that they probably already had their numbers. But if I could, if the committee would allow me, I'll start with Charlene and just if she can talk about how many positions she has and vacancies, and if there's anything she'd like to highlight. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Director. You actually kind of intuited where I was really going with this, and we'll get the crosswalk. So maybe I don't actually need the numbers, but what I am really more concerned about is some of these vacancies that have been vacant for a while that have been funded and that we've had a hard time filling, and what the approach is to making sure that we are getting the staff that we need to do the work, to have the capacity to move forward with a lot of these really important projects, and understanding whether it's a change in strategy or a change in budget to really make sure that operations are able to move forward based on staffing levels, and if there are these challenges that we're aware of them, and what solutions we can assist with looking into, and of course specific to this budget. So y'all don't have to get the exact numbers out. I know that we'll be getting those later, but just a little bit more speaking to that broader concept of challenges with staffing.
Okay, Counselor, thank you very much. Yeah, so I think, again, we talked about a few of the strategies. I think utilities does a relatively good job, as Director Dozier talked about, of this grow your own. I think it is very typical in utilities to create a vacancy is created, regardless, of why the individual left, if they retired or moved on. But it is typical that they do hire from within. So it is typical for an employee to work their way up through the ranks. So we do train and develop and fill those. And while that's a positive, as far as personal development and retaining institutional knowledge within our department, a definite challenge is that it does take a little bit more time. What I always refer to it as kind of the domino effect. If I have a higher level position, let's say even a management position that becomes vacant and it is filled with a lead worker, that's great. But it creates a vacancy as the lead worker that is typically filled by some type of under support apprentice, right, that has now moved into the lead position. So again, our main target that we try to get to is that we're really hiring at like that entry level, because our employees are moving up kind of, through the ranks, again, which is great with retaining institutional knowledge. But one vacancy really requires me to hire three people to kind of get through that domino. And so again, working with HR, so right now we do have multiple entry level positions, which is where our pool of candidates really reside. And really for us, building our organization to be able to accept those entry levels in and put them into a program of training and understanding how it is, what it is we have to do to run this utility, and what are the certifications they need, so that again, they can be successful in the future. So again, very aggressive training programs, whether it's driving or water treatment. So I know that, so Mr. Dozier, as he walked through, one of the things that we're implementing was a recommendation of $150,000 in contractual services. Again, there's some regulatory oversight, making sure that we have the right eyes, that we're seeing the right things and we're not getting tunnel vision. So it's good to have that consultant to help. But a big portion of what we're asking them to do is help us invest back into our training and development. I do believe that we work hard to try to get the employee as far as we can, but I don't want to short-sight an employee. And so again, bringing in professionals that continue to help and train and develop. And again, that resonates on both the water and the wastewater side. And environmental services, I think they do a great job of bringing in drivers and again, giving them the tools that they need to be successful. And they also have the ability to move within, where I do see utility workers that move on to become welders or mechanics or drivers or our next supervisors. Within utility billing, I see the same thing, where you move from customer service and now maybe you're running the billing, right? And you gain this knowledge of the system. And so I do think we have a good system in place. And I think we have a good strategy for working our way to this, making sure we always have an avenue at this entry level. We're always interested to talk to people that have experience, that are looking for a career change, but not overlooking this entry, which is really even where some of us came through, that we didn't work in utilities before we worked here. And we had a chance to come in at an entry level and gain the institutional knowledge that we needed to be successful, and making that available for the future. So hopefully that answers your questions. Definitely we'll get more specific, but I'll stop rambling.
No, I really appreciate that. And I do really appreciate that focus on building a career ladder for public utility staff. Once we get that crosswalk, if I have further questions, I'll be sure to reach out. And thank you for giving a little bit more clarification on that $150,000. I'm glad that we're getting some more focus and investment on those trainings. I was also curious to hear a bit more detail about the $250,000 for the master plan. I believe probably Director Dozier, that would be in your wheelhouse, if you wouldn't mind giving me some more information there.
Yes, Madam Chair, Councilor Cassett. The master plan is basically going through and looking at everything that is available at the facility right now and where it's going to into the future. So every around 5 years, we go in and we do a master plan on the facility and everything coming into the facility, whether it be equipment, treatment wise, what we're going to use, what we're going to change, how we're going to grow into the future to meet any kind of requirements for regulatory reasons, or just what companies and how we can facilitate getting the right equipment in here that we need, and what's going to last the test of time going through. So it really is just a deep look into how the facility is current and where it's going to go in the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you. And I imagine that probably results in like a capital improvements plan. So we have an idea of what kind of expenditures we're going to be needing to make with those updates. Am I correct in that being the end goal?
Exactly. That is exactly. It's a roadmap of where we're going with any kind of capital improvements, or even just as Director Jones said, opening the eyes to something we may not be seeing right now. It's we have to make sure that everything we're doing right now is working to build the better tomorrow. So
wonderful. And about, do you believe that this will be done within the fiscal year? Will you be able to complete the full master plan?
Yes, it should be.
Okay, wonderful. And I imagine it'll be presented up through Public Utilities Committee?
Yes, it is actually currently out for bid right now.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that, that information. The other question I had was just to hear in more detail about the Clean Energy Fund, how that's going to be working, how we're going to be, I'm guessing this is probably one of those pilot projects to start looking at how this impacts our community, who's going to be heading this up, who's going to be monitoring it, evaluating it. And if I could just get some more information there, I'd appreciate it.
All right, Madam Chair, Councilor Cassett. So we do have Neil Denton that's available. Mr. Denton does a great job for us. I'm always excited to hear from him, but I think if we can just give him a second, he can introduce us, and I think he can try to answer all the questions you have.
I think he just disappeared too, unfortunately.
All right, well, that was a great move. So on the plan B. Again, so
we can come back to it if we want to wait for Neil to get started. I can go, or to get back on. I know that we are short on time. I can go ahead and yield the floor for the moment, and then when Neil is able to reconnect, we can circle back, as I know that we do not have a flexible schedule today.
Yeah, and I bet that's a question that everyone would like to hear more about. So, Councilwoman Villarreal.
Director, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry about that. Director Jones, didn't mean to cut you off.
I just wanted to make sure that we're answering the questions. So Director Sitton is also more than capable that she can speak to it as well. So Neil Denton is a direct report of her. She's He's part of our team, but he lives in her house. So if there's specific questions, she can also try to answer that.
Madam Chair, I'm in touch with Neil via text. He's out in Pecos and his internet dropped, so he's trying to get back on. So however you'd like to do it, I can do my best until he gets back on, or we can circle back.
You know what? I know you're very capable, but I want to give Neil his moment in the sun. So let's move on. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also have questions about that. So when I get to that point, hopefully Neil will be able to join us. Just wanted to thank the Public Utilities team and all the different components that make up such important services for our city. And many of those jobs get unnoticed. So I'm happy to see the 8% increase for all union and non-union employees. So just going through the different, I guess, divisions, I had questions. And I'll skip, I guess, let's see, environmental services. Although all of the environmental services increases make sense, given the times. The only one I wanted to ask you about, Charlene, was about the graffiti team. So we have a graffiti team through Keep Santa Fe Beautiful. So how did you all envision the new staff person then also combining efforts with parks? Like how will that supervision occur, and how will that work together so that you all aren't duplicating efforts?
Thank you for the question, Councilor Villarreal. So the graffiti removal is going to completely move back to parks. And so we'll be working with them over the next couple of months, because the graffiti removal part that our team did was completely different from what parks did. Like they have to get permission to go on to private property, and they have to collect certain kinds of evidence, and our tickets currently go through the Rubicon system. There have to be before and after pictures. So there'll be some training that takes place, but all of the graffiti abatement will just move over there, and they will have, they're adding more maintenance type workers, and they'll have more workers in the field. And so I think that vision really had to do with their more staff that's out in the field. So we'll be training them to do that. We will keep our positions because they do other things. And so we're currently looking at moving some responsibilities around within our operations as well. And so our maintenance workers that currently do graffiti abatement also clean the drop-off sites and do other things like that. So we're working over the next couple of months to kind of have a new team in place. We'll be combining special collections and bulky collections and the maintenance of the drop-off sites and things like that for that team, and they'll take that over. But we don't have the details ironed out yet. So what we will do and have discussed with Director McDonald is we will continue to do graffiti outreach through our calendar and Keep Santa Fe Beautiful. We'll continue to support putting on graffiti wipeouts, graffiti education. So we'll continue to do that, and they'll just take the actual removal.
Okay, and so the graffiti abatement team will grow to how many people? You know,
our Counselor, our team, it isn't going to grow. We're going to combine some positions from the other sections and just recombine some responsibilities for the 3 workers that were responsible for graffiti, but also responsible for other things. So it'll be up to Director McDonald to talk about what she envisions for parks.
Got it. Sounds good. And now that we have Neil, glad to have you with us, Neil, and hopefully your Zoom is working. And I think both Councilor Cass and I don't know if we had similar questions, but the question that she had asked is about how well, first let me back up. The clean, let me just go to that page. The Clean Energy Fund actually was reminiscent for me in a very good way to the vision of Mayor Gonzalez. I think Councilor Lindell and Councilor Rivera will remember this. And we had the Verde Fund, and there was unfortunately, the funding didn't keep with that, but I feel like it's very similar in the efforts of like what we want to do with the Clean Energy Fund. And I think I salute you all for having that vision to keep that going, especially because it follows in line with what we had outlined in the Sustainable Santa Fe Plan. And so I think there's a question about just how it will be structured. I think Councilor Cassett said how it will work, who will take the lead, who will be monitoring it. And then my question is around the contractual side of things. So I'm really interested in like how that fund will be able to obviously support low-income communities and actually support them in the ways that it gives them tangible changes for efficiency for their homes, et cetera. And then it talks about a contract with the nonprofit. So I'd actually like to see how that's broken down and what percentage of that 500K is actually going to a contract versus actually going out into the community. And maybe not at this moment, but later on, I'd like to see the kind of just line item budget, even if it's just a skeleton at this point of like what the Clean Energy Fund will look like. So you could send that later on, but maybe just start there. And I appreciate your efforts for this idea.
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, thank you for the prompt to lay out some details about this. First and foremost, I want to clarify that the Clean Energy Fund is a nonprofit organization in and of itself that will need to be created. The funding in this budget will be used as seed capital to help create that. It will initially go to paying the leader in this field called the Coalition for Green Capital to essentially create a business plan, a small part of what's budgeted here, $50,000. That will result in a lot of the answers to the questions you're asking, a line by line budget, what fund products will be identified, how it'll work, and the process for administration. It will initially, the work will be led by the Coalition for Sustainable Communities, of which we are a member. We pay dues into that organization. They will take the lead on creating the nonprofit organization, establishing the board of directors, doing the tax paperwork, et cetera. Then the majority of the funds will go towards subsidizing the cost of clean energy, meaning solar panels or energy efficiency improvements at income qualified residences, those below 80% of area median income. I've learned from my Solarize program, which we just completed last month, that people really need a subsidy to see household utility savings when installing solar. The solar sales staff might tell you that you'll be able to switch your electric bill for your solar payment, but that's not actually true. So we've learned what those amounts are through this program, and we can take those lessons learned and scale them up to have a much bigger impact. Our initial pilot program resulted in 39 solar installs happening. And that was just by marketing the program in a target market within, say, public schools. So we expect to see a really big impact by scaling this up. And I do want to clarify on that point that this Clean Energy Fund, as a nonprofit, will administer the Solarize program. So it'll free up my time. We've run the pilot, we've learned the lessons, and we're spinning this off to be more sustainable. You commented on the Verde Fund and the sustainability of it. It was an impressive project. 300,000 went into the community that really touched on equity and environment. Now, something that's really unique about this is by putting public dollars forward, we will leverage private investment. For the green banks that exist already, nearly $2 billion of funds that were allocated from public sources in 2020 generated $7 billion in private investment. So as we help create the Clean Energy Fund, that's going to stimulate the economy and private investment in the clean energy field to make this more sustainable so that the city doesn't have to continue to fund such a project. Because ultimately there's a return on this investment, there's interest returns that's attractive, but we do need a nonprofit intermediary, the Clean Energy Fund, to identify barriers that are in place for financing clean energy projects where the private investment world is not already taking care of this. Counselor, you had a lot of questions there. If you could help me determine which ones I haven't answered yet.
Maybe if there was some kind of white paper of the idea of how the Clean Energy Fund would be structured. You said it's going to be supported by the nonprofit arm, a new one, or is it the Coalition of Sustainable Communities? I think there's also a question about like, how do we evaluate its impact? Councillor Cassett's always interested in that. And yeah, I guess I just want to understand, if we put in this infusion of money, then how does it get, who oversees the process? And if it's staff, you said that it would then follow, the administration of the fund would be a nonprofit. So I guess I not that you have to explain this today, but maybe there's a way that you have a description of how it's structured. That would help me, like how it was structured, how it fits into the Coalition of Sustainable Communities and the goals that we had from the Sustainable Santa Fe Plan. And then just, yeah, I think the structure is confusing to me, and maybe if I visually see it, it would help to understand like how that moves forward into the future. And we have a sustainable model too. Obviously, you talked about the infusion of private funds and other funds. That makes sense. So I guess I just want to learn more about that, maybe offline, or you could send it to us just to understand how that's structured. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, I do have a white paper at this point. We can send you via email here in a moment.
Excellent. That'd be helpful.
And Madam Chair, would you like for me to elaborate on the councilor's questions? Or
I think in terms of time, because there's other counselors that have questions, if you could send that to us. And then if we have any follow-up questions, we can connect with you or any issues that we think might come up. So I think that would be helpful, but thank you for your work on that. I'm going to move on to wastewater. I think it's great that we have this plan to look at our needs and the facilities and any upgrades and what we need in terms of our capacity. And I was just curious about, I think what concerned me when I look at the overall budget and then how it relates to wastewater. We know there's been issues at the treatment plant, and I guess I'm just looking at the line items and repairs and maintenance. I know it flashed on the screen. We didn't get this detail via email, but if you could send that to us, that'd be helpful. There is a line item for repairs and maintenance, and it didn't show any increases to that particular area. And I guess I'm just wanting to know and make sure that staff is supported in this effort, especially now that we have a 3-year compliance schedule with NMED. And I guess I'm curious if you all feel comfortable with the budget that was presented so that it can support the staff capacity and other needs as it relates to that compliance. And yeah, I guess I'm just looking at it thinking like, oh, I don't know if we have enough funding for that repairs and maintenance that we're looking to into the future. So I'm not sure who could answer that for us.
Madam Chair and Councilor Villarreal, I believe the page you're looking at is the one showing where the repairs and maintenance. If you look at the 2021, it was at 517,000. Mid-year this year, we've already pushed it to 1.1 million. And that's actually what we turned calling the budget for next year for any other added repairs and everything. So it's a little misleading when you look over in the change on the verses because it shows 0, but we actually doubled it this past year and the upcoming year.
Okay, and we actually don't have that visual that you, the level of detail that we haven't been sent that yet. I'm looking at the overall and then I saw it when you put it on the screen. So I just want to make sure that that's helpful.
If I can, it's on page 11 of 16 on PrimeGov.
Was that just uploaded today?
It should have been there. I don't know.
It wasn't there yesterday, so I didn't see
Madam
it.
Chair, Councilor, I believe our staff uploaded it yesterday.
All right,
So
well, I
it-
didn't see that, so I'll have to. go
Yeah, it
into-
is not, it does not appear to be in the budget book, but it is page 11 of 16 in the Prime Gov packet.
Okay, I'll take a look at that since I didn't see it last night, for some reason. Okay, well, I just want to make sure that we're supporting you all in the way that you need. And I don't know if Director Jones has a follow-up on the wastewater piece.
Madam Chair, Councilor Viorel, thank you. I think just to answer your question directly, I believe wastewater does feel supported. I feel I've been maybe not constant, but in definitely excessive communication with the mayor, the city manager, the finance team. I think pinning it down to one line item to look into resolve what the future of the wastewater reclamation facility looks like is bigger than that. So again, the 5-year master plan, I will say the facility does keep a 5-year master plan. And so the work that they're doing now is building on that process. How do we update the master plan? So they have had a plan, and I will say, even from the governing body, I feel you guys have been very supportive. Even out of the last 5-year master plan, the city has already invested over $30 million in upgrades to that facility, including anaerobic digesters, cogeneration, completing the aeration project now with new blowers, equalization basins, additional belt presses. I can go on and on with the work that's being done. So you're right, the repair and maintenance, like it's an indicator of the operational cost, and like Director Dozier talked about is, so we have seen that. We've already made the adjustments in our current fiscal year by doubling that amount and anticipating that will be the same going forward. But again, transitioning from, I'm going to say ultimately the old digesters and the new digesters does create a little bit of, it relieves a little bit of the pressure, meaning now staff can focus on some of the other processes. And now with the aeration project that we're just completing, which was over a $13 million upgrade that we're looking to complete the last portions of over the next month. Those are major investments that I'm going to say wastewater would not have been able to do if it wasn't for the support of the administration and the governing body. I think there's a couple of key things that are currently happening. One is a life cycle analysis that wastewater has engaged with in partnership with EPA and their consultants. We're looking for the life cycle analysis to be complete in May. A final report from EGR is the firm that is hired by the EPA. So we've partnered with them over a year of helping them go through a process that we need to know the results, but it also helps EPA as they kind of tread through like what is going to be their interactions with other utilities across the nation. So I do believe that we're also leading the way with our engagement with EPA. Again, I make no excuses for the work that's been done, and we're not letting up any pressure. Right, I was there with Director Dozier this morning for a good half day, even though we knew we had budget hearings coming. Right, we were pounding the grounds at 7 o'clock this morning because the wheels are turning. But again, major investments have been made. The operating budget, we do believe, supports the operation for next fiscal year. But really, where we knock the ball out of the park is these capital improvement plans, and $30 million is a major investment. We're not done, and I'm sure the 5-year master plan is going to have a nice price tag on it. And systematically, we will take that plan and work through communicating with the governing body on how we execute it and how do we do that diligently, knowing the impact that we have on things like the environment and our rate structure and all these other moving pieces. But so the short answer is I do feel that we do feel supported. I definitely appreciate the governing body and the administration. I think they're very supportive. Hopefully Mike Dozier feels supported of the utilities administration. So hopefully that answers your questions. But our recommendation for the budget, we do think that supports that. If it were to change at any given point, we'll be back before the governing body talking about what changed and why, and what does it look like going forward.
Thank you, Director Jones and Director Dozier. Yeah, I think the master plan will be important to like leading us into the future, like what our needs will be. I'm going to move on to the utilities customer service because we never want to leave out Nancy. I know she loves that. So this is not personal, but you know my beef about how we can wean ourselves off of contracts. So the question, you had listed 1.5 million for ITT and technical support for the utility billing system. So that amount is strictly contractual work, correct?
So yeah, Counselor, let me clarify that a little bit. I believe that it is a incorrect dollar amount. So the 1.5 million is a 4-year contract for Mountain River. The second year, I only need 350,000. So that total line should only be 514,000 instead of, I believe, there was like $2.6 million put in there. So it does look like it was a $1.5 million increase. But it really is just I believe, just a financial key enter issue. I went to our original budget that was requested and it was only 514,000. So that 1.5 million is a 4-year contract. All I need is just the second year funded.
Okay, if I can hear, Director McCoy, are you in hearing distance? And can you point to that line item in that page, please?
Yes, let me pull it up.
Yep, I can let you know.
Because I think to the extent you're correct, that causes an issue for approval of this budget. So I just want to hold here for a minute while we, and Andy Hopkins has his hand up.
Andy, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Councilor Villarreal. There was actually a miscommunication between Finance and Water early in the budget process, where we were actually asking for the FY23 contract amounts. But, and I take responsibility for this, our contracts template that we had them fill them out said total contract amount. So that caused some confusion in various areas in the public utilities department budget. Our plan was, because often during the year, public utilities does need to increase their contracts budget. You have seen several of those bars. Our tentative plan that we worked out with Shannon and the public utilities staff was that they would be evaluating their needs in the first quarter and second quarter of FY23, and then saying, okay, where can we scale this back? Where do we actually, need additional support? And we will be getting that. That our plan is to get that right sized in the first half of FY23. And just keeping in mind that money will not necessarily be spent in FY23. But we will be working with public utilities to right size their budget.
Yeah, I think the way it's written now is misleading, not just that amount. So if we could correct that amount. Also, it says for ITT and technical support, but it's really not our ITT. We're not working with ITT support at this time. We're still working with a contractor. And so it really should be more like implementation and application, which I think needs to be addressed because it's not ITT. And I think, as you know, I've been wanting us to go that route. And so I guess go the route of actually having our ITT take over this role. So if there's a way, if anyone has any insight about the plan to build out ITT support for public utilities, or is there no plan?
Madam Chair, I'll jump in if allowed.
All right, Director, I would ask you just to be succinct. We are really pushing the time this afternoon.
Yes, Madam Chair, clear. So I think our intent is, I would say that we are synced with ITT. So even through our projects, ITT has project managers assigned. They're part of our team. So we've already invested to make sure that there's specific trainings on the utility billing software, that we have their staff engaged. We're funding their education into the system. And so it is our intent to continue to transition that way. Again, I speak very often with Director Gonzalez on those needs and interactions of the project manager team. So they are engaged. And Councilor Villarreal, I have heard what you said and I hear what you say now. And I do feel that we're making gains on that direction. And I think ITT is very engaged in this specific project. And we are looking to the day when we can take over stuff as a utility and have ITT as a support for that. I'll end there.
I think it's good. I know maybe the transition will be hard for staff initially, but in the end, it's going to be better for all of us involved. So thank you. I think that's all I have for that section. Yeah, I think that's it. The only other question for water, curious who the security company we're using with the 289,000 bill or contract. Can you tell us the name?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, that for this year is Chavez Security, but that's out for bid currently for next year.
Got it. Okay. And okay, thank you. I'll just follow up with you about that later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilor Lindell.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just start in my budget book here and go through a few things. So, Ms. Jimenez, I don't really want to know the total that we spent on this. We've been doing this for a long time. What's the end date that we're not going to have this consultant anymore?
Do you mean Mountain River?
Yeah.
Well, we do have a 4-year contract with them. However, the third and the fourth year, I was instructed last budget cycle to come forward and explain where or when or if I would need the third and the fourth year for Mountain River. So Mountain River doesn't just do utilities though. They help with parking. They help with the financial CAFR. They do have other functions that they do with this contract, but I do have to evaluate during the second year, which will be this coming fiscal year, and come forward during the budget cycle for fiscal year 23-24 for that additional third and or fourth year for the Mountain River contract. So it's only been approved for 2 years with additional information needed if approval for the third and fourth year. Hopefully that helps.
On to the water division. We've got budgeted 216,000 for education outreach, public relations. Is this new or in addition to, or what we're currently doing?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman, the conservation programming budget increased by about $60,000 in this request, mostly related to educational outreach. And otherwise, the budget is fairly flat and represents continuing programming. I would also say that $216,000 is only about a third of the total non-salary and benefits related programming that we put towards conservation.
Okay, wastewater division, $250,000 for a master plan. Could you speak a little bit to that and how we came up with that dollar amount?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, that dollar amount was figured through our engineering department. It is a estimation for engineering hours for whatever company is doing the plan and any kind of other needs that the engineering company that does the plan would require.
Okay. That seems like a really low number to engage with engineering company to get a master plan. We'll see. I hope it's enough, but that seems like a really low number to me. Of all the numbers that I see when we deal with engineering companies, they usually have at least one more zero and comma in them.
We will hope they do not.
Yeah, me too. So let's go on to the Clean Energy Fund. And let me just start by saying, I think this is a great idea. We always supported the Verde Fund, but it would have been a really good idea if we could have had that white paper prior to the budget hearing, because none of us knew what it was. It's a big ask. It's $500,000. And I'm not really sure why we couldn't have had that prior to walking into this meeting. it creates questions. And so let me ask a few of mine. So $500,000, some portion of this goes to form a nonprofit, which then the nonprofit distributes whatever funds are remaining. Do we have any estimate of how many households we might expect to service with that amount of money?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, it's very difficult to speak to that at this moment without the initial assessment performed by the Coalition for Green Capital, because as I explained, what we're putting forward public funds in hopes of bringing in private funds. So the part that's unknown is what the total amount of funds that would be available will be. Based on the experience of green banks so far in this country, they've seen a return of threefold for every dollar invested. So let's say our investment results in a total of 1.5 million. And we offer subsidies of $5,000 per household. That's going to vary as well. So that's a nice round number, but just to give you a rough idea, that would have an impact for 270 households.
Based on our 500,000, not based on the multiplier, correct?
The math I just did was multiplying that by 3, just making an assumption that that's the amount of private dollars that would be brought in, which is a significant assumption. And these questions will be answered by that assessment. That's the first step here.
And did I see some number on the assessment being $50,000, somewhere around there? No? Yes?
Yes, we have an estimate of $50,000 to pay the Coalition for Green Capital to create the business plan for this.
Okay, so $5,000 per household, and these are, this is a subsidy. In order to qualify, does the household have to have a buy-in on this also?
The household would have to present evidence that they qualify as less than 80% of area median income, whether that's by presenting their tax return or presenting evidence that they receive other subsidies where they've already gone through that, like subsidies that the city already provides. But the household would be reaching out to the Clean Energy Fund because they're interested in installing solar or doing energy efficiency improvements. And the person at the Clean Energy Fund would then provide technical assistance to walk through that process.
Right. Maybe I wasn't clear with my question. Will the household have to have an actual monetary buy-in in addition to add on? Is this a subsidy in addition to? Does the household have any buy-in?
Yes, I apologize. I misunderstood the question at first. The households will be receiving loans with incredibly low interest rates, much lower than what are available right now, to make sure that they're seeing real savings on their electric bills, as opposed to just switching their electric bill for their solar payment. If we can get the loan payments for solar so low that they're actually able to see a 50% or more reduction, then that'll free up funds that people really need to pay for essential needs in their household.
And are those loans expected to come out of this 500,000 also?
The 500,000 will be used to encourage lending institutions, credit unions, to offer lower interest rates. One mechanism is called a loan loss reserve, where we can encourage credit unions to lower their interest rates, recognizing that in the event of default, they can pull from the loan loss reserve. That mechanism is really only necessary to get the lenders comfortable with taking on more risk, because evidence over the last decade has showed the default rate for clean energy loans to be so low because people are switching their electric bill for their payment. They already have those funds available.
Okay, I wish we would have had more information on this program rather than to have a one paragraph explanation of it in a budget book. I think that's a lot to ask of us to approve a brand new program for $500,000 that really, we had a one paragraph of information on it. And I would not encourage that to happen again. I think it's a big ask to go about business that way. That's all I have, Chair.
Thank you, Counselor.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mayor.
I know we're time pressed. I'd like to just say two quick words. One is the reason Neil is so familiar with and able to describe this with such great detail is that we have done the Solarized Santa Fe pilot that's already, as he said previously, solarized something like 39 homes across the city for people who are dealing with low to moderate income means. And the feedback, the benefits are absolutely proven. And this simply builds on that work and institutionalizes it. Secondly, I think the philosophy of this is twofold. One is if we are really committed to fighting climate change at the local level, we have to take direct and strong action. This is a direct and strong response to climate change and continues to put Santa Fe at the forefront of fighting a global existential crisis. But it's more than that because it's also a social program, a social policy. It makes it possible for everyone in our city, regardless of their means, to take direct action to fight climate change. Too often, a sustainability movement is criticized for being only for a small group of people in our country who happen to be wealthy. This is a democratizing of a sustainability commitment. And I think it is really a very powerful vision that our community supports broadly and the council historically has as well. And so while the ask is big, the crisis is real, and the time is right now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Lindell, if you could just take your hand down, that'd be great. And, you know, we are time pressed, so we're going to move on. I think this is an example of something that we will be hearing more presentations about through the standing committees of the council as it develops. I think we can do some more information even on this proposal if we want, maybe on our last day, if you want to, the extra day we have, we could do some presentations to better understand this. We can talk offline about what would help develop the understanding. And I agree. I think we should have had more information about this ahead of time so that we can understand and be more fluent in what it is that we're trying to do to meet the moment we're in and do something about it. So, all right, with that, do we have a motion on this budget?
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second, but did we have to make a adjustment or we did not? Okay.
I'm happy to have Mary speak to that. But no, we don't. It's, I don't know. Director McCoy, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, I think Andy Hopkins can add some further information with his conversations with the department. The plan is to leave as is budgeted. We understand from Director Jimenez that it is a 3-year contract and that any amendments to the contract, 4-year contract, and any amendments to the contract would have to come back into the council committee process for review.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other conversation about this budget?
Point to clarify that, what you just had stated. So Director Jimenez said it was a 2-year contract is what they needed. And it was not 1.5, so I'm confused.
Yes, Andy, can you speak to, or Nancy, are you there? Yeah, can you speak to this?
Absolutely. Counselor, it is a 4-year contract. The total for the 4 years was $1.5 million. The first year, I believe, was 800 and some change thousand. The second year is 350,000. The third and the fourth year, I believe, was 150,000 each for the total of 1.5. And during, of course, the third year of the contract, which would be next fiscal year, 2023 and 2024, that will, per last year's budget, need to be talked about in next year's budget for the third and fourth year. So it was approved for 4 years with contingency of bringing it back before the third year starts. I hope that helped.
Sounds like the 1.5 it's already in process, that we already have it in this current budget cycle.
That's correct. That's why I mentioned that there might have been the typographical error. But with Andy's information, we will definitely be looking at the contract. I don't foresee needing, obviously, 1.5 million because that's the total 4 years. I will need a much, much smaller amount for this coming up fiscal year.
Director Jones, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to provide clarification. So Nancy is correct. And so when that came across, I did speak with Andy Hopkins, and ultimately, so this is like fluid and it's going quick. So I wanted to be responsive. So ultimately, talking with Andy, what I told him I'd like to do is I'd like to stay with the recommendation of the budget as is. If there's a change that needs to make, meaning it's over budgeted, that we can adjust it as we go. So it is on my radar. We can come back in the first quarter adjustment. Like this isn't like one and done. One of the main reasons I did talk about that is, so currently we're under the implementation of the advanced contract. And right now, if I only budget 150, my thought was I'm probably going to be back before the governing body because something's going to change between now and the end of the year. So again, having that available just allows me to not have to relook at the financial plans of the utilities. But ultimately, I think Director McCoy is right. If any amendment was going to change before that money was going to be spent, it still has to come before the governing body. So I looked at it as it was kind of no harm, no foul. And it was, so chances are won't be spent and it wasn't an issue for the utility. Or if something changes, we're talking to the governing body. So for simplicity, I asked Mr. Hopkins if we could just leave it as is and not try to change all the books and presentations. So again, that was my response to him. So he's just going with the information I gave him. I apologize. I did not communicate that to Ms. Jimenez. I mean, we knew of the number, but she didn't know that I had told him like just to leave it as is for simplicity. But again, at the will of the hearing, of the committee, I'll do whatever you guys want. But for simplicity, it didn't really change the utilities budget.
Thank you, Director. Other questions on this matter? We have a motion and a second to approve this budget. Can we get a roll call?
Councilor Villarreal.
Yes, and I'd like to make a comment after.
Okay. Councilor Rivera.
Yes.
Councilor Cassett.
Yes.
Councilor Lindell.
Yes.
Councilor Romero Worth.
Yes. And circling back to Councilwoman Villarreal, explain
Just
your
want
vote.
to state that since we're keeping it at 1.5, even though we were told that it's not needed, I just want us to be cognizant if there's any amendments that come to us about this for more funding other than what we budgeted here, I'm not supporting it. I just can't anymore. I've been very kind about like wanting this to keep going and supporting the efforts and wanting to support staff in this, but beyond this, and I'm hoping it won't be 1.5, but there should not be any more amendments that we receive for this, for the next 4 years. That's all.
Thank you, Counselor. All right, we are moving on to, we have, let's see, next on our agenda is the union presentations. I believe we have at least 2 of the unions present, maybe 3. I'm looking in the attendee room. Director McCoy, how do you want to handle this?
Madam Chair, I'm admitting the unions. Now we have Mr. Trujillo from the Police Officers Association joining us.
Great, we'll start there then. Welcome, Mr. Trujillo.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, councilors. I'll be brief. I just wanted to express on behalf of our Police Officers Association our gratitude in the 2 investments proposed in the FY23 budget, as it comes on the heels of our, as we begin our economic negotiations for our next contract. The investments that are outlined in the budget were concerns by our union as far as retention and recruiting, and our ability to stay competitive with other agencies. These investments address that tremendously, and it addresses, and the winners here will be the citizens of this community as far as the public safety service they have been asking for and what they deserve. And again, I want to thank the investments that were proposed in this budget on behalf of our union. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McCoy, who do we have next?
Yes, I promoted both Local 2059, the fire union, as well as Local 3999, the AFSCME, the city's AFSCME union.
And who do you want to?
Either or. It's up to,
is it all right? We'll go to the Local 2059, and then we'll do the finale with AFSCME.
Madam Chair, Mr. Mayor, members of the committee, as always, thank you for letting me speak. I was asked to speak today about the upcoming budget proposals. I will say that the proposed fire budget shows growth in our department, growth that will help to shape our department in a positive way, growth that will make it safer, not only for us on the ground, but for the general public. We're seeking promoted positions such as training captains to keep us proficient in our ever-changing life in fire and EMS. Fire inspectors to keep us prepared and vigilant for potential hazards hidden throughout the city. A new health and safety captain to continue to keep our firefighters' health and safety a #1 priority. And 8 new firefighters to keep up with the demand of increased calls to service and expanding city limits. These positions will help our department keep up with the ever-growing workload that the fire department takes on. This budget proposal will show an 8% increase in salaries for our members as well. This is huge, although what these men and women go through on a daily basis, I'd say it's a little short. But as I tell you, we do have the best job in the world. And in lieu of money, we'll continue to take the gratification of helping citizens in their time of need. I have also been told that there has been no changes this year in our insurance benefits. Benefits have always been the biggest recruitment and retention tool in the fire department. And I want to continue to express this. Having great insurance benefits makes it easier for members to commute to work from affordable areas. We will see an increase in our premiums of 18.5%, but our membership sees the need for good medical insurances on a daily basis. We accept this increase and we appreciate the fact that we will not see lesser benefits. In conclusion, the city's been through a lot. We know the stresses of the pandemic and we know what tragedy feels like. Over these times, I've seen the city grow apart and come together. I could not be prouder of the men and women that I have represented through these times. These firefighters are tested daily They overcome every challenge thrown their way. No other fire department in the state runs fire and EMS with our volume. We truly are masters of it all. So I hope we can go forward as a city, can continue to work together to give the citizens what they need and the employees what they deserve. The profession, my profession teaches me that we need to be able to adapt. And I hope that this budget presented today allows for adaptability for unseen needs as we move through this year. I want to thank everyone for allowing time to speak. I do thank you for lifting up this city, and please have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for being here. All right, we have two representatives from AFSCME. I'll let you take it away in whatever order you had planned.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Finance Committee Council members, Madam Chair, staff members. My name is Therese Martinez. Louis DeMella and I will be speaking before you representing the AFSCME Union Local 3999 membership. Today, we are addressing your invitation to set before you the budgetary financial needs of our membership. We'd first like to acknowledge with gratitude the announcement made yesterday of the anticipated 8% salary increase for all AFSCME union employees. The increase is appreciated. However, it was difficult not to notice the disparity in the budgetary appropriations of all the employee unions. AFSCME Local 3999 is to receive an 8% salary increase. The firefighters local is to receive an 8% salary increase and a $750,000 fund for mortgage assistance so they can live and work in Santa Fe. The police union is to receive a 16% salary increase and a $15,000 hiring incentive and the $750,000 fund for mortgage assistance so they can live and work in Santa Fe. We ask, why is AFSCME Local 3999 not treated equally? AFSCME Local 3999 has the largest membership of all three unions. Therefore, the budgetary decisions made affect the major part of the employee workforce. Where is the funding for mortgage assistance for these employees to be able to live and work in Santa Fe? Why does the police union garner double the salary increase over the other two unions? Where is the fair and equitable apportionment? Our membership recently submitted almost 300 letters to the members of the governing body requesting a 10% salary increase that would just begin to address inflation rates, cost of living increases, and a proposed 12% insurance increase for all city employees, not to mention the increased cost for gasoline, for commuting from outside the city to work, and groceries to put food on the table. The bare essentials are big necessities. We implore you to rethink and adjust accordingly the union apportionments. This then raises other financial concerns for our union membership. For the last 2 years, AFSCME Local 3999 has been in contract negotiations. During that time, only a handful, less than a third of the 38 articles have been tentatively agreed upon. The once-a-week meetings are not occurring at all now. Any efforts made by AFSCME to meet have remained unanswered. The biggest obstacle, we believe, has been that the majority of the remaining articles contain financial budgetary elements. The city negotiation team refuses to move forward or move toward any increases, hence improvements of any of these articles. We ask you, the 3-year contract now expired for 2 years, making it now 5 years older, has seen a lot of change in the world and in the city, cannot remain with the old conditions, correct? Any item unmaintained for 5 years needs an upgrade, needs improvements. This committee is tasked with the financial responsibilities of the city of Santa Fe. This committee would be instrumental in providing guidance to the city contract negotiation team members in the successful discussion of settlement of the contract terms. Otherwise, it will remain what it is now, a stalemate, no movement, no progress, no improvement. Please provide that guidance to the team members. Please keep in mind that the AFSCME collective bargaining agreement covers articles that affect employees every day in their working lives: bilingual incentive, longevity, training and tuition assistance, PPE, wages and benefits, promotions, employee sick leave, employee annual leave, administrative leave, voting, court, personal, education, military, family medical leave, injury, and mentor leave. The very crux of what attracts potential employees to the city of Santa Fe. These must be adjusted to reflect the cost of living and inflation, much like the recommended city budget is doing today. The AFSCME collective bargaining agreement covers articles that affect overtime, compensatory time, classification and pay, shift differential, medical and dental coverage, parking, snow and ice removal, and other incentives such as emergency and traffic hazard incentive pay. As you can see, all of these articles need to be addressed, and a consensus needs to be reached, especially going forward, not just to attract talent to the city of Santa Fe ranks, but to make progress for the current AFSCME collective bargaining agreement, but also for future negotiations. AFSCME proposes and requests that a line item be added to the future budget in perpetuity for contract negotiations that will reflect fair and equitable cost of living and inflation rates factored in. They can be distributed to the financially affected articles in the AFSCME union contract. We feel this is particularly important and a necessary addition to the recommended budget.
Thank you, Therese. With all that said, AFSCME has reviewed the proposed budget, and here is a highlight of our insights based on what we've seen so far. On page 8 of our city's proposed budget, a direct quote: "The police department's budget includes the collective bargaining reserve in the police department's budget, totaling $2.251 million, an amount equivalent to a 16% increase to salary and salary-dependent benefits for members of the Santa Fe Police Officers Association, which will be allocated through the collective bargaining process. The fire department's budget includes a collective bargaining reserve totaling $0.877 million, an amount equivalent to an 8% increase to salary and salary-dependent benefits for members of the IAFF Local 2059 to be allocated through the collective bargaining process. The Human Resource Department's budget includes a collective bargaining reserve totaling $2.565 million, an amount equivalent to an 8% increase to salary and all salary-dependent benefits for members of AFSCME Local 3999. Department budgets include the equivalent of an 8% raise for all exempt and non-union city employees." End quote. The city has made 4 groups of employees regarding wages: police, fire, AFSCME, and the exempt/non-union employees. Based on this proposed budget, there are 2 of those groups who aren't going to have their funds allocated through the collective bargaining process: the exempt/non-union employees and the AFSCME union employees. This is just the proposed budget, so it stands to reason the absence of allocating funds to AFSCME through the collective bargaining process must simply be a typo. The city would certainly not forget about its collective bargaining process with the AFSCME union employees, especially since this union has been in contract negotiations with city management for 2 years. The biggest delays in completing that contract are specifically over any financial items in our contract. For example, we want our bilingual members to have a bilingual incentive pay that is on par with what's currently provided for police. More of our citizens are speaking Spanish as a primary language or English as a second language. Any one of our bilingual staff can tell you how grateful those members are of the public and that they have a Spanish language service offered for the people trying to navigate the numerous services offered by the city. Everything from paying their water bill, having their trash picked up, or getting a library card. These workers serve a vital and increasingly necessary service to the city. The amount we are asking for these workers is to reflect the obvious increase in costs since the bilingual pay was first established, and the increase in the necessity of as many of our union members as possible to be fluent in both English and Spanish. Our members' most common concern is that the city has no formal recognition for the experience of our employees in regards to their wages. You can be working here 9 months or 19 years, and for far too many of our members, the difference in pay between those employees can be measured in pennies per hour. With some newer employees coming into departments of the city at a higher pay than staff in the same position, staff who have been working in that position for over a decade. Our solution to this issue is a longevity pay scale. These are cheaper than an across-the-board pay raise, since the cost can only increase based on years of service. The increase will be pegged to the date of the new budget year, so there will be no complications in payroll regarding employee anniversary dates. And it will give our most experienced city workers a perfect incentive to stay with the city, especially in times like today where retention and incentive perks for employees, such as our health insurance plan, longevity leave day, and reduced cost for access to our fitness centers are some of the primary benefits the city offers its workers. A longevity-based pay scale will go a long way to both attract new talent to the city and ensure talented city workers keep working for the city. This proposed budget has AFSCME union members being granted nearly the same pool of money as police, despite AFSCME having over double the staff of police. Some of our AFSCME members include staff at police who help make that department function. To be clear, AFSCME does not expect nor request anything close to a 16% increase. All we ask is 10% instead of 8%. That additional 2% will be used to assist in and ideally finish our contract negotiations with the city. The 2% more AFSCME is asking for would more than cover the costs for the 2 above listed incentive items for our members, and it will help to finish a contract that is over 2 years in the making. Your employees have let you know. They've told you in meetings, they have sent you letters. 10% is what they expect from the budget this year. They will happily call each of you if that will help clarify any concerns this committee's members or any additional counselors may have in regards to those additional funds. As always, the AFSCME Union Board is available and willing to talk to any of the counselors or administration should you have any questions, comments, or concerns. In a city with a proposed operating budget of over $328 million, an extra 2% towards your largest workforce to help attract/retain workers and finish our labor contract will go a long way in improving the working conditions for city workers, freeing up resources of management that have been engaged in our labor contract negotiations for over 2 years, and showing our workers that we have a city council which listens to its constituents that make up the city's largest labor force. Thank you for your rapt attention to our financial and budgetary concerns. We wish you all luck in the coming weeks, also that you have a good Good Friday and a good Easter/Passover weekend. Respectfully and in solidarity, we are Local 9.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentations. All right, that concludes the presentations from our unions, and it also concludes our agenda for this afternoon's session. And guess what? We finished 2 minutes ahead of the drop dead 4 o'clock. Sorry that we were running so tight today. Tomorrow, we may have a little bit of extra room, but we do have a council meeting scheduled right up against the Finance Committee. I appreciate everybody working together to have the time they needed to ask questions, but also be respectful of the limited time we have. We'll start up again tomorrow at 1 o'clock, and I believe Director McCoy, do you want to tell us so we know what our homework is tonight? The budgets, we have a number of them tomorrow, I believe. Community engagement, city attorney's office, city manager's office, internal audit work, the city council, and the mayor's office. Am I correct on that?
Madam Chair, yes, you are correct. We will be sending out uploading the presentations to PrimeGov this evening. Within the next hour, I anticipate staff is completed.
Okay, terrific. And if you get any of the presentations that we'll be hearing a couple days from now, any sooner, let us know.
That is the goal, Madam Chair. Yes, we understand. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, we will adjourn for tonight and see everybody at 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon on this same channel. Thanks. We're adjourned.